Welcome to Stockholm, Sweden, and the 2023 Nobel Prize Teacher Summit hubs. My name is Isak Pettersson. I work at the museum as a teacher, and I'm here to introduce the hubs to you. Just a few minutes ago, we finished the program here at Münchenbryggeriet, the 2023 Nobel Prize Teacher Summit. Over 350 teachers gathered to listen to our fantastic lineup of speakers, 2 Nobel Prize laureates on site, and to discuss with teacher colleagues. Now, here's your chance to join in. The hubs format for the Nobel Prize Teacher Summit is based on local engagement, where schools, universities, science centers, and Swedish embassies around the world invite teachers to watch the recorded version of the summit together and discuss, reflect upon the theme. And the theme this year was teaching knowledge, learning engagement. As our societies face major challenges, it is more important than ever to uphold democratic values, human rights, and the trust in science. We emphasize the essential role of knowledge as a basic requirement for engagement and for building sustainable democratic societies. At the core lies the question of what role teachers can play in promoting engagement. The lectures and interviews are between 15 and 25 minutes long, and it's easy to choose the segments that interest you the most and the discussion questions that goes to them. If you haven't found already, all the material is readily available on our website, nobelprizemuseum.org. So, good luck. We hope that you will find the material inspiring and that it will spark some really interesting discussions. And don't forget, without excellent teachers, no new Nobel Prize laureates.
This is a book of mean people. Some mean people are big. Some little people are mean. There are people who smile when they are being mean. Mostly, mean people frown. Shouting is a favorite thing of mean people. But some of the meanest people whisper. These are the mean people I know. My grandparents are mean. My grandmother tells me to sit down, and my grandfather tells me to sit up. How can I sit down and sit up at the same time? My mother is mean. She says I don't listen. She says, "Do you hear me?" I can't hear her when she's screaming. My brother is mean. When we play chess, he says, "The knight can't go there." He knows the knight goes every day. My teacher is mean. He says, my letters are not on the lines, but his letters are in the spaces and on top of mine. My babysitter is mean. She says, "Hurry up, you're wasting time." how can I waste time if I use it? Big people are little when they are being mean, but little people are not big when they are mean. Screaming people disappear when they yell, and frowning people scare me when they smile. I will smile anyway. How about that? Ladies and gentlemen, esteemed guests and advocates for a more open-minded and tolerant world. My name is Robert Fuchs, and I'm an actor in the Stockholm City Theatre, but I'm also a drag performer, as you might have noticed. And I just read the book of Mean People by Nobel Laureate Toni Morrison. She wrote this book 1999 together with her son Slade. And the grown-up world and its language can be very confusing to young people. To a child, meanness can have many shapes, sizes, and sounds. Meanness can be a whisper or a shout, it can be a smile, it can be a frown. And the list of mean people can grow to include parents, as you heard from the book, or siblings, bullies of several varieties. In 2017, I was involved of starting a project where drag queens read books for children in libraries here in Sweden. And since then, I've met thousands of children in cities, villages, in book buses, in suburbs, and out in the countryside. I've told them about heroes, dragons, princesses, darkness and light, and daring to overcome your fears. In the world of books, everything is possible. And we, as adults, we have a responsibility to spread love, not fear. And the children out in the countryside and in the cities, they were always enthusiastic. You know, books have always held the remarkable power to transport us to far-off lands, ignite our imaginations, our courage, and to challenge our preconceived notions. Now, imagine pairing this transformative power of literature with the captivating artistry of drag queens, where many of my sisters mastered the art of self-expression, diversity, and acceptance. When drag queens read to children, they provide a unique and empowering experience. Children's books featuring characters from various backgrounds, genders, and orientations can help break down stereotypes and promote empathy. When we read those stories, they embody the very essence of embracing differences, fostering a sense of belonging, and teaching children that it's not only okay, but really beautiful to be who you are. And when I read books for children, I also try to spread my love for literature. And we all know reading is a gateway to learning. And when children associate reading with fun, excitement, and sometimes even celebration, they hopefully develop a lifelong love for books. And this passion for reading not only broadens their horizons, but also equips them with the tools to navigate a complex and sometimes very intolerant world with an open heart and an open mind. In a world often marked by narrow-mindedness, intolerance, and militarism, it is our duty as grown-ups to serve as ambassadors of hope, to represent the promise of a brighter, more inclusive future. So let us therefore celebrate the boundless potential of our children's imaginations. Children need to be protected, not from drag queens, but from fearful grown-ups. Thank you. And finally, before I go back to the rehearsals of Matilda, the musical, yeah, it's based on the book of Roald Dahl, where a young girl and her love for reading challenges the mean world of grown-ups. I want to end with the same words and call for action as I always do as the TV host for Drag Race Sweden. Don't be afraid of yourself or anyone else. Stay together. Be courageous and keep sparkling from the inside and out. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Robert Fuchs, for this sparkling and, in the most beautiful senses of the word, enlightening start for all of us. My name is Erika Lanner. I'm the director of the Nobel Prize Museum, and I would like to say a warm welcome to all of you to the Nobel Prize Teacher Summit 2023. I see faces here from last year and from some even more previous summits. You are all very welcome, old and new friends. To smile and to bring smiles to the faces of others can truly be an act of activism. To make optimism and hope guiding star in a world where there's darkness can be an act of activism. And we are going to explore this today, how the many various roads of engagement have the power to change lives, whether it's in the classroom, whether it's in a laboratory or in an editorial office. The Nobel Prize history has really shown us that engagement is the fuel to action. The belief in progress, whether it's about understanding the universe or fighting poverty, has led to changes, has led to insights and to really important and meaningful improvements. And this will be shown to us in many various ways by the amazing guests that we have in our program today. They have all, their work have in many different ways shown that engagement is key. And that is the engagement that stands on a profound and solid base of knowledge and critical thinking, which makes it all start with education, and thus start with you. So we're sparkling in pride of this lovely program that we have ahead of us. Thank you for being here to share it with us, and enjoy the day.
So, yes, you are indeed very welcome to this summit today. So happy to see you all. It is going to be an intense day with us running up and down from these two stages like maniacs, but most importantly, we will have the opportunity to reflect and listen to our amazing guests, as Erika said. Now, the people running up and down from the stages are mostly us. So it's Gustav Källstrand, it is Isak Pettersson, and there you are, Pontus Thunblad, and myself, the short one in this gathering, Karin Claesson. Isak, you will also be in charge of the questions,
Yes,
right?
yes.
So what's going to happen with that?
So we would love for you guys to participate, contribute with some of your questions to the speakers. And there will be some of the sessions today, there will be a window for asking questions to the speakers. How do you then ask a question? Do you raise your hand? No. You, using your smartphone, you scan the QR code that's on the table sign, which will take you to a form where you can post your questions. I will then assume my position in the very center of the room on a small island from where I will forward your questions to our speakers. Also, you can also leave a greeting or a thought to any of our speaker, or just simply say hello, and we will forward that hello to the speaker at the end of the day. Yep.
Great. We will soon, very soon, introduce our very first guest. But Pontus, you have some thoughts regarding the theme of today.
Yes, thank you, Karin. So, I've been a high school history teacher for almost 20 years. Teaching is my passion. But here's the catch. How can I make my students feel the same excitement about history as I do? I mean, history is like this epic adventure. Whether it's diving into the transformation of the year 1000, riding the waves of the Industrial Revolution, or marching alongside the suffragettes in the early 1900s. Over the past 20 years, I've spent countless hours chatting and brainstorming with colleagues and students about the art of learning. And you all know that if our students are as engaged as we are, it's a whole lot more enjoyable, right? Yeah. So, how do I and you light that fire for learning in your students? And how do we make sure that they soak up all the good stuff? Well, that's not just a problem or a thought for us modern teachers. It's been on the minds of the great pedagogues from way back when, and you know that. But there's a social aspect of this as well, as both Erika and Robert was aiming at, because we live in what some would call a global knowledge society, with global market competition relying heavily on a workforce that possesses expertise, sparking keen interest from the states in education and school systems. And on the other hand, we have a lot of challenges on our plates, from keeping the democratic flame alive to respecting human rights and trusting science. That's a hefty load for our students. Some rise to the challenge, and as you know, some feel the weight. And as teachers, we have a critical position here. We want and we need to help our students to handle that pressure and to navigate the maze. It's not just about them, it's about what society we want to live in. We're not just aiming for our students to grow as individuals. We want them to become savvy citizens who can make a difference, make informed choices, and keep democracy ticking. And today we have gathered scientists, activists, researchers, professors, and laureates, sharing their perspectives on the theme of engagement and knowledge. And our goal is that, by the end of the day, you will feel inspired to light that spark of curiosity in your students. So, Emma, you're a science writer and a researcher at Karolinska Institutet. Emma has also won the prestigious Journalism Award and been named Educator of the Year. Please give her a warm hand again. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Happy to be here. When we are young, we have a natural tendency to think like a scientist. So we learn how the world works by observing and experimenting, just like scientists. For instance, we can take a glass of water, we can see what happens when we pour the liquid on the floor. We can observe our parents and see how they react to our experiment. And this is how we learn more about the world around us. But nowadays, children are not only exploring the real world, they are also exploring the digital world. And in this digital world, there's abundance of information. So there's a lot of good information, but there's also a lot of misleading claims and false claims and myths and unverified observations. So therefore, it's very important for children to have a tool set in order to distinguish fact from fake. And I myself, as a researcher within medicine, as an epidemiologist, I became interested in these questions over a decade ago when I myself was out on digital platforms, and I noticed that there were a lot of problematic claims going around about medicine and health. And I reacted especially strong about the myths that were being spread about vaccines. For instance, this type of misleading statistic claiming that there are links between vaccine and autism. And this link between vaccine and autism, this is something that has been debunked. It has been shown in numerous studies that these vaccines are safe and effective. But still, this type of misinformation has been spread around the world, and we have also seen problems with this in many different parts of the world. And in 2019, the World Health Organization listed hesitance towards vaccine as one of the largest threats to global health. And when the coronavirus started to spread around the world in the beginning of 2020, the World Health Organization were early in recognizing the problems with this type of health crisis in this new digital era. And they said early on that there wasn't only a virus outbreak that we had to handle, but also a so-called infodemic. And in parallel with the pandemic, we have definitely experienced this infodemic. Early on, there were a lot of strange claims going around about the origin of the virus. There were people claiming that the virus had been manufactured at a lab in order to be used as a biological weapon. There were also people claiming that the vaccine industry deliberately spread this virus in order to make profit of selling vaccine at a later stage. And there have also been groups linking 5G to COVID-19. And this may seem like a very strange conspiracy theory, but there have been, for a long time, people worrying about negative health effects of electromagnetic fields. And Wuhan in China was also a place where 5G were established and tested very early on. And as you know, Wuhan was also ground zero for this virus outbreak. So people are linking these events to each other, and this is also very characteristic for conspiracy thinking, that you believe that everything is somehow linked and nothing happens by coincidence. Later on, during the pandemic, we could also see a lot of strange claims going around about how to prevent and treat the infection. Everything from eating a lot of garlic to drinking bleach. And when effective vaccines became available, we could also see a lot of mis and disinformation focusing on the vaccine. But thanks to the vaccine, we have now left this pandemic behind us. But it has also become evident that the infodemic is here to stay. And when Russia invaded Ukraine, we could see that this was followed by massive propaganda and a lot of misinformation being spread about this situation. And something that has been very much in the news lately is, of course, the technical development that is also resulting in new challenges when it comes to how to navigate in this abundance of information. So generative AI is providing an opportunity to produce content that seems very credible, even though it's not. And we can also now produce a lot of claims, a lot of content to a low cost and at a fast speed. So this is also increasing this type of problem. So you can almost say that we are now entering Infodemia 2.0. So, of course, we also have to handle this information, and the question that remains is there a vaccine against the infodemic? And this is, of course, a very complex issue, and it is impossible for each person to always be able to distinguish truths from falsehoods. But I believe that everyone can become better at sorting this overflow of information by using their scientific thinking and by increasing science literacy in the population. The public as a whole can become more resistant to the infodemic. So what do I mean with science literacy? Well, of course, this has to do with critical thinking. Question the claims that appear, that you're exposed to daily. Is this really something that is coming from a trustworthy source? And this, of course, involves scientific claims, but you can be used by thinking critically in any type of situation. For instance, if you see this type of picture on Facebook, it may be useful to question, is it really likely that the Pope would be taking a bath, smiling to the camera with two women? Is this coming from a reliable source? Is there other sources confirming this? If not, you should pause and not spread this to other people. Science literacy also has to do with identifying the reliable sources. This is of great importance, being to identify sources such as peer-reviewed scientific journals, organizations that are unbiased, and also being able to identify the right experts. And the reliable sources is, of course, depending on what type of subject you want to get knowledge within. But this is the sources that I went to during the pandemic to get credible and trustworthy information. And you see here Hans Rosling, professor of public health. He was unfortunately not with us during this pandemic, but he's here as an example of a scientist within this field who is also very good at explaining things to the general public. Today, a lot of experts are very narrow in their expertise, and some of these problems that we are facing nowadays are very complex, they're global issues, and therefore it may sometimes also be useful to talk to different types of experts. And I've also listed here the World Health Organization as well as the Swedish Public Health Agency, this type of organizations that review the science within this area and help us to get recommendations and guidelines that are based on the best current evidence. But something that we could see during the pandemic is that experts do not always agree with each other, and they sometimes change their minds. And this can appear as very contradictory. And therefore, it's also important to understand how science actually works and understanding the scientific process. So science is about formulating hypotheses and trying to test them by using data. And this is also something that takes time. Science is a process, meaning that we sometimes have to update our knowledge when new data and new research appear. It is also important to sometimes gaze inward as well and question your own beliefs. We humans, we like to think that we are very rational and that we are very much unbiased, but that is not completely true. We have a lot of biases, a lot of so-called cognitive biases, and I'm only going to mention one of them that I think is especially important during these digital times. And that's something called confirmation bias, meaning that we have a natural tendency to notice things that confirm our pre-existing beliefs. And at the same time, we ignore things that go against these beliefs. And today we are living in this abundance of information. It's easier than ever to find a source confirming what you already believe, even if what you believe is completely false, and then you get even more convinced of this false thing. So we have these biases on an individual level, but we are also, of course, often part of a group. And sometimes, as you may be reminded when you see these guys, we adjust our beliefs to our friend group or the group around us. So from an evolutionary perspective, it has been very important for humans to be part of a group in order to get protection and shelter and get food. And therefore, we sometimes conform to the beliefs of the group. It's more important for us to belong to the group, to be accepted, than to be correct in our beliefs. So therefore, it may be very important to sometimes remind yourself of this and make sure that within a classroom or within a group that you make room for diversity and different opinions. And when everyone agrees, it may also be useful to let someone play devil's advocate just to test whether your arguments really hold. So finally, it may sometimes feel a bit overwhelming living in this infodemia when we every day are exposed to a lot of information. But I think it's very important also to remember the power of scientific literacy, and you can remember it's very much like the spread of a virus. False claims can't spread if you don't transmit them to other people. So at an individual level, you can make a lot of difference by choosing maybe not to transmit information or to share it with your peers online. And I think it's also very good to let people focus on the scientific method and the scientific way of thinking, because it may also be a way of closing the gap between young individuals and the scientific community. Young people may not always be able to relate to the stereotypical build of a scientist, someone, an elderly man getting the Nobel Prize, but by focusing on how they can use the scientific way of thinking in their everyday life and how this can be useful for them, I think this is something that may increase the interest of science in young people, and maybe also making young people wanting to pursue a career in science later on. Thank you very much for your attention.
Now it's time for our next guest. During the pandemic, there was every day at 2 o'clock, there was a press conference here in Sweden. And at the forefront of that press conference was the state epidemiologist who told us to wash our hands and keep a safe distance. And today we will, our first guest, or my first guest over that stage, we can come over here and we'll walk there together. We've had an interview with Anders Tegnell from the Public Health Agency. Welcome. Så jag kan sitta längst bort för att sitta. So you see we're keeping a distance already. Yeah, so these press conferences that were every day during the pandemic, why were press conferences a priority for you as an epidemiologist during a pandemic?
I mean, to be perfectly honest, they were not a priority for me. If I would have a choice, I would have a lot of other things that would have been a lot more interesting and fun to do. But we started doing them, and the interest was enormous. And then we said, okay, should not do them too often. Let's do them maybe once a week or so. And then actually our Minister of Health came and said, I don't think you guys really understand how important this is. You really need to have a daily press conference because that's what people want and what people expect. And I think that our experience really proved how right he was. And I think this is something we didn't quite, at that stage, understand how important it would become.
What were the things that you would have liked to do instead at first?
I mean, this was, it was an infodemic, but it was also an epidemic of new data. We got access to and we could work with data that we had never seen before. And that was a fantastic experience. I mean, we got data from mobile phone providers, we got data from the big stores, we got data from restaurants about how people are moving around in society, which is a critical knowledge when you want to understand how a virus is spread in society. So there was lots of interesting things to do, except standing there answering basically the same questions every day.
And now you get them, well, you still get basically the same question, but now we just asked why you said those things. But getting that data, is that how, I mean, that's an interesting contrast you mentioned. You have lots of complex knowledge that were interesting, but the advice were still simple. Is there a paradox there?
No, I don't think it's a paradox. I really believe in simple solutions. If you can't find a simple solution to a problem, you probably don't have the right solution. And in these kind of situations, you need to go for the simple solutions. I mean, there's sometimes also complex solutions, but they usually don't work.
Okay.
So I really think, and I think that's part of what we as an agency need to do, is to try to distill all these very complicated things around us into something quite understandable and to make it logical, what we ask people to do.
But was it hard to communicate sort of that difference between having, I mean, on the other hand, having simple answers, which seems like if there are simple recommendations, people maybe think that the questions behind them also are simple, but it seems to me like the knowledge, like you say, were complex and also changing. Was that a mismatch between the changing knowledge and having simple solutions?
No, I think it's what Emma was alluded to. You need to have a lot of humility in this. I mean, you need to also all the time tell people, okay, this is where we stand right now. This is the best available knowledge we have at this stage. We keep on collecting knowledge all the time to be even better at giving you advice. So the advice might change, and that's not strange. I would say in this kind of situation, it would be more strange if the advice didn't change.
But you also said then that this, well, you became eventually convinced that this was a good idea to communicate often. What did you see that made you feel like this was a good idea?
And I think that's not only now, it's also the experience that we had over a long time, that if we don't fill this space of knowledge, somebody else will fill it. And sometimes that's quite okay, but quite often then a lot of strange things will end up in that space. So we really felt that it was part of our mission, part of what we should do, to constantly fill that space with good, reliable knowledge, so people sort of knew, okay, where are we now? And we understood with how fast media and everything worked. If we weren't there all the time, available all the time, somebody else would fill that space. And actually also from our point of view, it would just create more work for us, because we would have afterwards tried to come out and rectify what was there.
What were the... I mean, I guess it was important for you to make sure that people trusted the public health authority, but maybe people did that anyway. Sweden has a high level of trust in authorities. Was that a big help from the start?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, trust is something you build up over decades, maybe even centuries, but you can destroy it in an afternoon. So I think our main concern was not to destroy that trust, but to keep it. And I think that's incredibly important. And it's a discussion I often have with colleagues from other countries when they come and ask how come Sweden managed to do this without sort of getting the police to go out and stop people in the streets and so on. And it was very much because of the trust, and also very much because of the kind of society you all are a part of, which is very much a society built of trust. I don't think we really understand how important that is or has been. We talk a lot about the individuals and how all the young people are so concerned about themselves and so on. I think that this pandemic was an excellent example of that. When really put to a test, people can be quite solidarity, and they can make things to help each other in a way that we maybe didn't really believe before this.
But so it seems like maybe this trust goes both ways, that people trust an authority if the authority seems to trust them.
I think trust always has to go two ways. Otherwise, I don't think it's trust. So it went between us and the population, all of you, but it also went from us to the political level, which was just as important. So, and I think that's what I mean when I said that, from my point of view, the Swedish society is very much a society built on trust.
Yeah, because we sometimes hear or people claim that, or want in crisis, they want more authority and more strong leaders and so on, but that they feel safer. But then it's not really trust, it's maybe just wanting authority. Yeah,
and I think, I mean, most people are quite smart. And if you give them a good advice and tell them why they need to follow this advice, because you want to achieve something, you want people to meet fewer people, then you need to tell them, okay, what can you do back home to meet fewer people? You don't have to tell them you're not supposed to leave your home. It's much better to tell them what you actually aim for.
But still, was there, I mean, giving people, trusting people to be smart, sometimes, I mean, I know that I don't feel too smart. When you have the advice, like, for example, should you meet 7 people in your home or 6 people? And so it became, you wanted this, you mentioned the same questions during the press conferences. How many people can we actually meet? Why is it safe to have 7 people over for dinner and not 8? So is there a contrast between having sort of clear advice and also the advice seeming arbitrary?
Yeah, and that's something you have to balance, because I realize that many people would sort of like to have, should it be 1 meter, 1.5 or 2 meters? And sometimes it's good, because if you're a store owner and want to sort of put these arrows on the floor and so on, you need to know if it's going to be 1 meter between them and 2 meters. And of course, science, there is no science behind that. You have to sort of choose a figure that seems reasonable and work with that.
Yeah, so but maybe that's also an image of science. We tend to think about science as something very exact and precise. But this epidemiology in itself, I guess, is a sort of a statistical and probabilistic science.
Yeah. No, it's not exact. It's not 1 meter. It's somewhere between 0.5 meter and 3 meters.
No, yeah. But now we're sort of safe. But you also said that there's trust between the authorities and the policymakers, but is there a sort of boundary there as well? I mean, or should the authorities run the whole show?
No, that's not how democracy and our society works or should work. I mean, we worked with public health which is only one part of a very complicated society. And we can take our advice, what we believe is the best from their point of view, to the policymakers, and then they will, of course, also sort of think about, okay, what will this do to economy, what will it do to the security of our nation, and so on. And out of that come down to, okay, what do we need to do as a society? And sometimes public health can be the lead, but sometimes other things needs to take over.
Yeah, I guess it's just sort of some questions aren't about facts, they're about values, maybe. What kind of society we want to have. We heard Emma mention that Public Health Agency as an example of a credible source, which is must feel good.
That's nice.
Can you just say something about how? I mean, you mentioned a bit about the complex, but how do you work to be a pub? I mean, I read the newspaper and there's a report on this and a report on that, but I guess you work more on an aggregate level. What do you actually do?
No, I mean, it's built on that we had been there for. Now we are a reasonably new agency. We're only like 10, 20 years old. Many agencies of Sweden are several hundred years old. But this is something you build up over time. By being very factual, by being very open about what do we base this on, and also making that kind of knowledge available. I mean, many people also found that we made a lot of data, a lot of figures available, which was quite a lot of fun for a lot of people apparently, because a lot of people sat there and did their own small calculations and in very interesting ways, sending advice to me on this is the best way forward, according to my calculations. And,
oh, did you get a lot of emails from people giving you suggestions?
Not a lot, but quite a lot. It was, some of them really were very innovative, I must say.
Okay. But so we talked about trust in authorities, but also, I mean, the fact that you were there at these press conferences, you also became sort of the face of the Swedish strategy for combating COVID. What was your experience? You became like a celebrity.
Yeah, and that's the strange part of this, and I don't understand it. I don't know if anybody else understands why there was suddenly this. Instead of just being there as a civil servant or an expert or something, I suddenly became also a person. I mean, I worked in this field for quite some time, and I have media coverage before, and it's never really turned to that. Then I've just been the expert, being able to sort of give the background and good advice. Why it became so personal this time? Yeah, it's a very good question.
Yeah, I think this might be actually a good time to bring Emma back on stage, who has written a book it's called The Expert Paradox, about experts and the scientists in public. Maybe she can explain. I mean, just to show an example, this is a T-shirt of Anders. Do you have, people got tattoos with you? It's a quite nice one, right? Do you have one of these?
Not exactly that one, but there is a plethora of...
But you don't wear them around the house?
I can wear them around the house, yes, but nowhere else.
Okay. Welcome back, Emma.
Thank you.
Anders was surprised by this T-shirt. Do you think we should have been surprised? Or is it typical to get... maybe not T-shirts, but trust in people, in experts, rather than authorities?
Yeah, well, I think that Anders was very visible, of course, during this pandemic, and he was the one who kind of stepped forward. It wasn't our statsminister, it wasn't politicians, it was Anders, and I think even though I myself always try to advocate that you should trust the scientific method, humans have this tendency to connect to other humans. We don't connect to a method. So I think Anders became this person that people felt this connection with, and maybe felt a bit safe also knowing that he was taking care of things for them.
Yeah, in like if you went to restaurants and public restrooms and things like that, it was Anders' face and said, Tegnell says, wash your hands. So we had to do it.
They're still there.
Yeah, they're still there. Yeah. I don't know if we have them here, but but I mean, for you, I mean, you were quite clear during the pandemic that you talked about more about the method than about your. Of course, this wasn't your own beliefs, but it still got connected to you. I mean, you were surprised by it, but do you also see why this, if not just about yourself, but in general, why people tend to trust experts?
Yeah, I think there's the safety in it somehow, in an unsure world, that somebody can stand there and try to explain it for you, to give you some kind of also vision on what's going to happen, even if there is a lot of unrealistic thinking about how much you can do that. Still, that somebody is trying to do that for you. I think that that gives you trust in a world which you cannot control really anymore. And that's what happened to us. I mean, suddenly there was this new virus, and it did things to us and to our world that we didn't really believe was possible to happen. And then I think this was that somebody at least stood there and seemed to be able to understand why this happened.
Yeah, but that's some maybe good things about that. But why, apart from maybe being embarrassing, but what do you think is problematic? You were also got a lot of criticism, of course, to you personally. Was that sort of a problem about this?
No, I mean criticism is part of my work. I mean, this happens all the time when you work in this field of science, and there is always, as somebody, I think you said, there is always science who have other ideas, and science is complicated. I mean, if you want to prove something, you can always find some kind of a citation proving basically anything you want to prove, including drinking bleach, unfortunately. So I think there's always going to be controversies, and controversies are good because it really makes you think a lot more about your own ideas, and it hopefully takes you a bit away from that you tend to look at the things that proves what you already think is the truth. But by meeting other people who have other ideas, you are forced to start thinking outside your own box, and I think that's really, really important.
What do you think?
During this pandemic, the public was following the scientific process in real time in a way that I think they maybe haven't experienced before. Maybe then they get the answers from the public health agency when people have been studying this subject for decades, and they have reached this kind of scientific consensus where at least most experts agree. But it's quite natural when a subject is new that experts do disagree. When there's not a lot of data, there's not a lot of research on this topic, and this coronavirus, it was new to the world. So it isn't really strange that experts disagree or that experts change their mind, but I think it's important to also have some knowledge about how this scientific process develops in order to understand this type of situation and not get angry when experts disagree or when they change their minds, to understand that this is a natural part of the scientific process. But I think this was also, of course, the pandemic. People learned a lot about science, so it was very positive in that way as well.
Yeah, I guess one of the problems that I can see with this is where do you sort of draw the line? On the other hand, it's good to have experts challenging each other, and controversy is good because that's how science works. But on the other hand, it's not good to have people challenging some of the things that experts say. If you're not an expert yourself, how do you know? Sort of there's a foundation that everyone agree on, but that's and then some of the things on top that people don't agree on. How do you draw?
Well, I would say that look for intellectual humility. So I think people have this tendency to maybe believe the ones who are very sure of themselves and very certain. But I think the trustworthy experts, they have this humbleness, and they are very clear with what we know and what we don't know within this area. So I think you should look out for these people who are being very certain of themselves. That may be a red flag.
So, but you might be wrong about that.
Of course.
Yeah, that's the tricky part, right?
Yeah.
How do you trust someone who tells you who to trust, and that's a dilemma. But I mean, for example, during the pandemic, washing your hands, everyone agreed that was good. No one questioned that. But above that, almost every other advice was questioned by someone. That was a bit tricky for the public.
But this is, and I think you need to realize that very many of the measures, including washing hands, is extremely difficult to prove. Because there is so many other things interacting with this. And I think that's something we're a little bit lost in the discussion, that what works in one context might not work at all in another context when you come to public health. I mean, we can keep distances in Sweden and we can make that work, but you cannot keep distances in a village in Bangladesh. And you need to take that into account. And somehow we lost that, because in many places of the world, there was supposed to be one solution, and that was going to be lockdowns and face masks, and that's going to fix the whole thing. And of course, it was not that simple. So I think that's one of the tricks and one of the things you need to understand, and sometimes also makes it difficult to communicate about this, that for every kind of measure in public health and also in many other areas, you need to take it back home. You need to think about it. How is this going to work back in our place? Both practically, but also what would be effects when you move one kind of measure from one environment to another, because you can be reasonably sure it's going to be different.
But when it comes to washing your hands, there are not many negative long-term side effects.
No, exactly.
You can become dry, your hands can be dry, you could get some kind of eczema if you wash them too much, but it's very different as compared to maybe school closures, for instance, where we see these very negative long-term effects on children. So this is also, of course, part of the decision. What kind of aspects do you consider when you make your decision? Do you only listen to those who want to stop the spread and take the spread down to as low levels as possible, disregarding any other negative side effects when it comes to maybe democracy and education and other aspects of public health? So I think this is also important to remember. You always have to weigh different risks against each other.
It seems like we're sort of coming back to, you mentioned the scientific method and the whole sort of in order to have a realistic view of science, in order to trust it, we have to understand what maybe the image of science, as we said before, that maybe the public thinks that we think that science should be exact and it should be valid everywhere, like gravity, that works the same way everywhere and it's forever. But it seems like it's not only about well, not in black holes or something, but but it's not only about sort of getting knowledge; it's about using the knowledge. Is that right?
Yeah. How do you mean specifically?
Well, if you get knowledge about a new virus or something, like all the complex knowledge, but then what the real trick is to figure out how to use it, how to, in what context or what. I mean, I'm thinking about maybe in the classroom you have some student coming and say, I've read this paper and this study says this, and the study might be right, but it has no relevance to whatever field it might be.
Yeah, and nowadays we also see that a lot of preprints, so-called preprints, studies that haven't yet been peer-reviewed or published in scientific journals, they are being published on open databases. So you can build a narrative based on preliminary results saying almost whatever. So I think it's very important that people learn now that result from a particular study, it doesn't really mean much. You need different sources, different studies from independent research groups pointing in the same direction in order to say that something is based on science.
But you're right. I mean, there is an important step after the science, and that's the implementation of the science. We sometimes tend to disregard that because that's sometimes a very difficult step to take in many ways, and it's often not taken. I think WHO at some stage said that if we have implemented all the knowledge we have about children and children's diseases, we could halve the level of childhood mortality in the world. But we don't do that. And of course, there's so many reasons behind that. So I think that that is a really important step. Yes, we can have science and it can give us good answers to many of our questions, but if we can't take those answers further into some kind of activity, it's, at least from my point of view, it's not a very useful point.
Yeah, maybe that's, you mentioned in your talk, Emma, that maybe we should not just look to the experts and the Nobel laureates and the experts on authorities on stage. Maybe also the one problem with the Nobel Prize, and the Nobel Prizes are of course fantastic, but one problem with them is that maybe they highlight this basic science discovery, but they don't highlight the process of making them useful for the benefit of humankind. It seems like, well, one thing, when you go online and you search for like science literacy test, you get the kind of question that, what is the freezing temperature of water? Maybe a bit harder than that, but the names of the planets. But it seems like that's actually the entirely wrong way to use scientific literacy in what we're talking here.
I think the definition of science literacy is both knowledge in science, which is what you're referring to, but also this type of framework where you formulate hypotheses, you base your conclusion on objective data, and you make fact-based decisions. So I think it's both of these things. I think knowledge and facts are also very important in order to get some kind of understanding about whether something is credible or not. So I think both parts are useful. I want to get some questions in from the audience, but I have just one thing I thought about is how do you change people's minds with using science? We know that, for example, if I'm convinced of something and you say I'm wrong, that will only strengthen my convictions. But Anders, like you said, that controversy is good, and you like that in science, and it should be discussions. It seems like, do scientists have a more open mindset to this? And is that something we all can learn?
I'm not sure about that. I think scientists are a heterogeneous group of people like so many else, and some of them are extremely set in their ways, while some of them are more open. So I think that's not that easy. I think what we have learned when we try to make people maybe not change their ways, but a little bit more adapt to knowledge and so on, that you try to work with the groups that are very convinced about something. It's very, very difficult and usually not useful. Vaccine hesitancy, I think, is good. Really set in their minds, have really decided by themselves that this is no way, I'm not going to ever vaccinate my child because I think it's just harmful. Instead, you need to work with that group who is a little bit hesitant, somewhere in between. That group, you can, if you give them good information, if you give them a good background and good knowledge, they can then sort of follow your advice. But it might even be counterproductive to work with the people who are really set on their minds, because you give them attention, and somehow giving them attention can also give them credibility. So I think that's what we learned over the years. You work with the people where you have a possibility to get things moving.
I think we often believe that if we have the best arguments, the best data, we will win the argument. But unfortunately, this doesn't really happen. So I think it's also very important to remember the importance of building trust, and that this may be even more important than communicating the correct facts about vaccine, for instance. Like in Sweden, we are very digital, we are very much exposed to disinformation when it comes to vaccines, child vaccines, but still 97% of all children are being vaccinated in Sweden. And I think this has to do with the high public trust, and also this model when you go to BBC with your small child, you build this relationship and you get this connection. So when this nurse comes to vaccinate your child, you have this trust, so you know that this person is doing something that is good for your child, and then you will trust that this is the best way.
Yeah. Good. So, Isaac, do we have a question?
Let's see if my mic is on. Yes, we have questions pouring in. Also a greeting to Anders. Thank you. It says, Anders, you're on my bathroom door reminding my family to wash our hands. And also, people are really curious to ask Anders about the COVID pandemic, and a lot of questions surrounding if another pandemic was to come around, or looking back in hindsight, would you have done anything differently?
I think hindsight is a very difficult concept. I believe very much in learning from your experiences, but not dwell too much in what will have happened if it is that, this or that, because I think what at least we try to do all the time is to try to do the best we could, given the situation we were in and the knowledge we had and so on. Of course, there are many things that could have been handled better in Sweden. I mean, we all know about the elderly homes. That didn't work. It was really a bad experience for many. And a pandemic is a kind of stress test of our society. And I think that's what we need to take with us. The stress test showed us our elderly homes are not working very well. Our healthcare system does not have supplies enough in place to keep on running, and a few other things. And that's what we need to keep on working with, not dwell too much if we did the right thing or not. A pandemic is not a competition. A pandemic is something you need to work your way through and try not to hurt more than you can help. I think that's something which is a sort of basic concept in medicine, which we sometimes tend to forget. You're not, and also very much in many of the legal systems in Sweden, is the sort of concept of proportionality. You should not really institute new things that you don't feel convinced about that they are going to help, and that might hurt more than they help.
Thank you. Time for one more?
One more question.
Yep.
Sure.
A classroom question here too, both Emma and Anders. Through the years, I've had plenty of students who clearly believe in alternative facts, have an answer for every question, and believe in conspiracy theories. What is really the best way to engage with such a student in a constructive way?
Was it to Anders or to me?
To both of you.
No, I think it's important to try to actually counter this with curiosity. So not just telling you're wrong, it's stupid of you to believe this. I'm sure none of you would do that. But being curious, asking questions, why do you believe this? What happens if we both go online and try to search information? Will I find the same information as you find? And so on. And try to have this open mind, and also trying to focus on getting a good connection, getting a good discussion in this issue, so that people will open their mind, and then you will have a higher probability of getting these people to change their mind. But it is very difficult. It's important to be aware of that, and it won't happen overnight.
No, I don't have much to add. I mean, you need to keep the dialogue going, and you need to somehow convey that there are other interesting things to look at. And I think if you do that, and if you keep this dialogue going, you can convince people. I think there was a very good example in Stockholm where one of the doctors collected people or parents who didn't want to vaccinate their children. And they met over so often, they sat down together and they talked about what their beliefs were and why they had those beliefs. And she was then trying to sort of show them, okay, there is other data out there, and what do you think about that, and so on. And to do that in a very humble way, and not trying to tell people, how can you believe something like that, or you're stupid or something, but instead try to meet them.
Another one?
No, we were in overtime, it says here, so we have to move on to the next point. But thank you for the questions, and thank you so much, Anders and Emma, for this talk. And our next point will be a greeting on the screen from one of the Nobel Laureates. Do you know Nobel Laureates they usually talk a lot about education? Some of them very often say that they didn't like school very much, but they usually liked one or two teachers very much. So they don't like school, but they like teachers. So maybe you share some of that experience. Anyway, we'll see a greeting from Saul Perlmutter, who's very much engaged using his status as a Nobel laureate to further education in the world. And he will also introduce a theme for one of our breakout sessions. So, take it away, Paul. Saul.
At the Nobel Prize Teacher Summit.
Yeah, okay.
I'm Saul Perlmutter, and I'm professor of physics at the University of California at Berkeley. I hope you're having a fantastic day there in Stockholm. I couldn't make it this time, but a few of my colleagues are with you today. For the past 2 years, we've been creating a high school curriculum for 14 to 18-year-olds on critical thinking. So why critical thinking? Well, many of the really big problems we face in the world today, from climate change to pandemics, stem from the fact that we constantly fool ourselves. We're bombarded by false information. But even without disinformation and misinformation, our own brain is amazingly adept at fooling itself. And scientists know this. We've spent centuries trying to minimize it. The group of tools we've developed are essential to make any kind of scientific progress. But amazingly, these tools are rarely taught in schools. They're often not even taught to scientists. You kind of pick them up through osmosis. So we've developed a curriculum, Scientific Thinking for All, a toolkit, with Nobel Prize outreach. The first module is now available, and we'd really like you to try it. Mark from STEM Learning at the UK is with you today and will run a workshop this afternoon. So I hope you enjoy it.
I would love to introduce to you our next speaker, Iann Lundegård. He is Associate Professor and Lecturer in Didactics with a focus on natural sciences and education for sustainable development. Please join me and take it away, Iann.
Great, thank you so much. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Great, then we have a relation. I'm at Stockholm University. Research and teacher education in science, but with a special interest in sustainable development. I have for a long time have research focused on students' involvement, commitment, engagement, agency and deliberation on a micro level in classroom studies. Yes, here follows my short speech or talk before coffee break, yeah? Great. Yes, this is the clicker. The world is now facing enormous changes. Homo sapiens spread over the planet has, especially the rich part, created such great changes of the conditions that we now have reached a point where the whole system is in imbalance and the planet begins to beat back. This stage has been given a name, Anthropocene, which is referred to and debated, of course, on a scientific and philosophical level. At first, there is one thing I want to emphasize. Our task can never be to educate our students to be a tool to solve the problems that we, the earlier generation, have forced them into. This is not a responsibility that we can escape from by trying to educate them to be engaged and committed. Here we must ask ourselves who we are in this, what we have done so far. Of course, we can and should prepare them, the students, to pay attention to all the upcoming threats and to be prepared with hope and a will to create a better future and to serve them with appropriate knowledge to participate in this. But as grown-ups, we here and now must take the full responsibility for the society we offer them to take a part of. And this is important, I think. In education, this new era of challenges requires a couple of new perspectives on learning. Complexity, wicked problems, risk, fact resistance, as we heard about now, fake news. Recently, together with a couple of other researchers in Sweden, I have been involved in writing 3 what we call modules, initiated by the Swedish Agency of Education and directed to all stages in Swedish schools. We call it a didactical framework or grid aimed for teachers to use in their collegial development. you can always find it on the net. My own research topic is didactics. This is also what we nowadays refer to as teachers' professional science. Here we study the student-teacher subject-content relationship with an aim to develop teaching and learning, and of course also to approach and investigate things critically. In this short presentation, I will mainly focus on the how question, the didactical how question, how to organize teaching where sustainable development is connected to democracy. The how question, yes. The Swedish school system, and probably even many other countries, has two overarching assignments or missions: knowledge and democracy. But there is a risk if we are splitting them into two separate aims or activities. Instead, we have to look for how they are and can be united. It is by a combination of these two as education for sustainability and students' commitment and engagement might arise. If we first take a closer look at the democratic missions, the world in the Anthropocene needs committed people who participate and act. Democracy is a human right that creates space for freedom, action, and change. And all educational research nowadays shows that an opportunity to participate turns worries and anxiety into committed action. The educational philosopher Gert Bista has made a useful distinction which many often return to about, for, and in democracy. You can teach about democracy with the main aim to give the students knowledge about how the democratic system is organized and so on. You can teach for democracy with the main aim to give the students knowledge about how to take part in formalized democratic processes. The later to arrange for teaching in the spirit of democracy is based on thoughts already formulated by the educational philosopher John Dewey. He regarded democracy as a form of life, which had made human to human being, actually. It's more than a form of government. It's primarily a mode of associated living or conjoined commuted experience that students have to take part of to go out in the society and take part of public issues. Let's take a look at the knowledge mission, the epistemological point of departure. There has been a strong preconception, almost a paradigm, which spoke about learning as a passive, more or less passive process. Basic knowledge is seen as packages of something that is needed to receive before one can be engaged and participate. But for a long time, educational scientists have fought to twist that picture and present an opposite view, that participation is the heart of most knowledge production. In this way, learning, knowledge production is also a process tight connected with democracy. But what is then to be done to develop an education that combines the two missions into an education that leans on participation and engagement? We, me and a colleague, Cecilia Karman, did a research review and wrote an article on this. And we found what we call 5 forms of participation. 5 forms of participation with a didactical how question as a planning tool. That the students have to opportunity take initiative and influence, agency, converse, listen and deliberate, deliberation, imagine, create, creativity and innovation, criticize and questioning, as we heard about here before, critique and norm critique, participate in a reality that actually matters. Let's take a very short look at them. Agency. There is different names on this. Empowerment came from Agenda 21 in Rio once, I think. And action competence is a common word here. How do we organize classroom activities where the students are given the ability to participate, take initiative, and cause an impact at the issues at hand? Here's an example from WWF, where the students have the opportunity to go out in the societies and make changes, actually. Deliberation, conversation. How do we organize the classroom activities where the students are given the opportunity to exchange ideas with classmates, the teacher, the surrounding community, and others? To the left here we can see a value clarification exercise on GMO, and the deliberation can of course be on the net too. Creativity, innovation. We are in need of creativity and innovation in the society today. How do we organize classroom activities where the students are given the opportunity to participate and develop creative, innovative ideas about change? To the right here we have a class that had a brainstorm how to create a sustainable school, for example. And in this stage we don't pay any, what do you say, blanket on, let them brainstorm. To the left we have an year number 1 in school who have inspired by snails, trying to figure out how to take care of the snails' ways to live, and be inspired to create a society out of this. Engineers often do that. Critique is of course very important here. Critique based on knowledge, as we heard about here. And critique about sources, trolls, fake news, but also critique about norms. Norm criticism is important today, and Me Too could be an example of this kind of critique. Maybe Greta's movement is also kind of norm critique. So this is important for the democratic movement. Authenticity. How do we create a classroom situation where the learning situation become authentic? Sometimes this is reached by visiting places in the neighborhood with significance for the students' own welfare. And to the right down here we have a class that worked together with a recycling station outside their city and gave recommendation to them how to reach the people in the community by recycling. And of course learned a lot of science in this context. Okay, so 5 forms of participation. Which answer the didactical how question as a planning tool? Sometimes, and all together with illustrators, we had made a model, a metaphor on this. The solar body illustrates the way the students have the ability to take part of the democratic process, pivotal in education for sustainability. The sun rays illustrate different examples of content areas, what to put projection on. This has sometimes been a tool for teachers when organizing education on these issues, not just asking for what content to bring in, but also asking how this content is going to be approached if the students are to be committed, engaged, and involved. Not just ask for what, but also for how this should be arranged for in a democratic sense, which is essential for sustainability, engagement, and hope. You gave me 15 minutes. Yes, to talk about this. I could use hours, and you can always mail me or something, so or talk to me afterwards. Thank you.
So, thank you, Iann. I met you for the first time where my colleague Anna Olander invited you to the museum and to talk with us at the education department. It was last year, I think. You know, over that year we had a couple of very interesting discussions, and I would like you to really check out your research online, because I think your work is very, very helpful and important when you deal with this kind of issues. So please check out Iann's research. Thank you very much. Give Iann a hand. So we're continuing with the program, and it is my pleasure to introduce to you the founder and leader of the Glada Hudik Teater, and this is Per Johansson, and I've heard Per speak a lot of times, and I think that you would agree with me if I gave you the tagline, "Nothing is impossible if you just believe in people and give them a chance to develop." So give Per a warm hand.
Hello everybody, my name is Per Johansson. I'm the founder of Happy Hudik Theater. We founded 20 years ago in a town in the middle of Sweden called Hudiksvall. In our ensemble, there is people with and without disabilities. This is a picture from our ensemble. They have Down syndrome, they have autism, they have Asperger. To our first performance, 1996, we're supposed to sell 400 tickets. 376 of them we had to give away. Nobody wanted to come and watch our show. Our last shows, Elvis and Wizard from Oz, have sold over 450,000 tickets. When I start my job with people with disabilities, I was surprised that they trained them in what they couldn't do to fit into society, instead of highlighting what they could do. I start Glada Hudik Teatern for many reasons. That I want to play theater myself as a leader, that I want to people what I work with to shine and do what they were good at, and want the rest of society something common with those people. My conviction is that the human encounters are the basis of all development. Many people ask me today, how have your actors developed during this journey? I used to say they develop a lot, but the biggest development is the way the rest of society looks at them today. 5 years ago, I received a letter from Emma Örtlund from Gislaved in Sweden. She wrote to me about how she wanted to be the queen of the school prom. She had bought a pink dress and a tiara, but it wasn't to be. The people who bullied her for so many years won. She never went the prom. Now she wanted to be a model and do her own catwalk to get the revenge of the bullies and show that she was good enough, and they went wrong. She wondered if I can help her. She said, if I write to you and Glada Hudik Theater, things normally work out. 2 years before Emma writes the letter to me, a woman calls me and say she's seriously ill with cancer. Her last wishes for her daughter to be a part to what Glada Hudik Teatern do. The person who called me was Emma's mother. This made me to decide me to help Emma and fulfill her dream. 4 years ago, Emma performed her own catwalk at the New York Fashion Week with 4 friends from Happy Hudik Theater, Kitty, Alex, Niklas och Ida. And when I got experience this, it was like every feeling I had rushed to my body in a couple of seconds. And this amazing journey be a movie called Catwalk. And here you can see a sample from the movie.
Jag kallar ihop er av en anledning. Det är att vi ska tillsammans göra en egen modevisning, en egen catwalk.
Det passar verkligen glitter. Tackar.
Vi är också unika människor och vi måste också få glänsa.
Vår catwalk ska bli New York! Min dröm är ju att alla i den här gruppen som ska göra den här catwalken ska bli en förlängd arm till alla människor som aldrig fått chansen att skina.
This is two princes here in New York today.
Nu vill jag göra revansch, göra min catwalk till min bal.
And here is Emma when she's stepping out on the catwalk in her revenge dress. She never get to wear at the prom. It's a medical moment for me. It's a medical moment for all things I believe in. And it's a medical moment for Emma. This is Niklas. He's a member of the catwalk team. He's a member of Happy Hudik Theater. He was born in 1977. He was adopted away when he was 4 months old. He had a life great with two wonderful foster parents who are not longer with us. When we are about to fly to New York and shoot our film Catwalk, my colleague Johanna gets a phone call. And the guy say that I'm Niklas' brother. And it turns out that Niklas had 3 biological siblings. They have seen Niklas on TV and thought, he looks like us. They do their own research and came to the conclusion that Niklas was their brother. So they had to be reunited. And then Niklas had 2 questions to them. If he could give them a hug and if he could sleep over at the Christmas Eve. This is Niklas and his 2 brothers at the premiere of Catwalk. Andreas and Christians. And this is one of the highlighting moments of my career. I don't feel very comfortable to speak English. We're trying to be better, but it goes slowly. And when we should fly to New York to film the Catwalk, we're going to the US Embassy in Stockholm to do an interview for work permits. I'm super nervous, I'm scared. I don't know what I can say when I get the questions. And I'm going into the embassy with a friend, Ida. She's a free spirit. She's never nervous. And I tell her before I go in, Ida, I'm pretty nervous. Ida replies, why? I'm not so good in English. Ida say, Per, don't worry, hang on me, I'm great in English. And I say, what English word do you know, Ida? Per, ich liebe dich. To this film, we have started a school project called Catwalk in School here in Sweden. And to date, we have 107,000 students have participated the project. And in this afternoon, my colleagues Anuki and Pauline will tell you more about the project Catwalk in School at the breakout session. And finally, sadly, prejudice, bigotry, and hate never take a break, summer holiday or vacation. That is the reason why we must never compromise on the right to exist, the right to be different, and the right to take part on our terms at the school prom and in everyday life. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Per.
Thank you. Not any question, not in English.
Okay, I won't hold you.
Yeah.
But I want to just give you a big hand again. I'm very inspired by your work.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I'm sitting here with our next guest, Sara Bengtsson. Welcome.
Thank you.
You are a neuroscientist who has studied motivation and what makes people do the things we do. And we've talked today, and we will talk more today about change and how people get motivation to change and become agents of change. But from your perspective, what makes an agent of change?
Well, what makes a person want to change and make an impact and a difference that influences a lot of people is, of course, a very complex process. But from my perspective, I would like to highlight 3 psychological processes, partly because they are close to my own research, but also because I think teachers may be able to influence these aspects. And they are self-efficacy, a sense of injustice, and group identity.
So, well, that's good that you have 3. So let's do them one at a time. So you started, but the first one was self-efficacy. What do you mean by that?
Yes, the self-efficacy is the child's belief in their own ability to do a task well or to manage a task. And I would argue that this confidence in your own ability to do a task is arguably one of the most important psychological processes we carry. Every day we are estimating the likelihood of succeeding when making a choice. Should I do A or should I do B? Well, what are my abilities and where am I most likely to succeed? So that's what we do. So our self-efficacy makes our choices.
So is it so we do the things that we think we are able to do? Is that a summary?
Yes, yes. So we make choices and actions based on what we are most likely to succeed in, because then we get the most reward for the cost that we put in. And we have some new data which are quite exciting, showing that this confidence in your ability activates areas in the brain that are also activated in sustained attention, task focus. So when you have high confidence in yourself, you activate areas that makes you focus on your goal.
But how is that connected with learning? Because if we do the things that we feel likely to succeed in, why would we try new things?
That's a very good question. So first of all, this confidence comes about from competence, which means that if you repeat and repeat and repeat and repeat an act several times, you learn them, you feel confident and competent and then confident. Now, as you say, why don't I keep on doing something I learned for the rest of my life, being happy with that? Why do we seek out new challenges? Well, it's because of this cost benefit balance. So benefit is also a reward. If I am very, very certain that I will do well on a task, there is actually very little reward. At some point I become a little bit bored. So for me to feel rewarded or benefit from the situation, there needs to be some element of excitement and difficulty.
Okay, so in order to encourage learning, it's a good way to do that then to teach people that this mechanism exists, that if you learn something new, you will get a reward from it, and that you can.
Yes, so what I see in my research for now over 20 years repeatedly is that the brain is constantly changing. It's very plastic. So as soon as I experience something new, there will be changes in my brain, and that's very important for children to understand. They need to be confident through repetition. We have also shown that using your hands-on learning increases your confidence, trying yourself rather than being a passive viewer. But also, once you feel very confident in one area, do try something new, because you will be able to manage due to the plasticity of the brain. Yeah.
So to understand that the brain can change in itself is motivating, or at least helps.
Studies show that the understanding that the brain can change helps people grow and try new things. Just the mere information that the brain can change.
Wow.
Yeah.
One more question about self-efficacy, also because we often learn, in learning, we learn by mistakes often. I mean,
Yes.
how does that play into this, if there's no reward? Or is the lack of a reward also a signal?
So it turns out that our brains are actually, in a normal circumstance, when things go as we predict it to go, the brain is fairly silent. It's not that much going on in the brain. It's when it goes against our predictions that there are strong learning signals in the brain. That's when our neurons really wake up. We call that prediction errors. So then we have to, start to think: is this something information I should actually use, or should I discard it, or what should I do with it?
Okay, so and then we start to evaluate these probabilities, and then they will learn and get motivated. Okay.
Yes.
I think I see how it connects. So, but that's the self-efficacy. The second is sense of injustice.
Yeah, so that's very typical, of course, in someone who wants to generate a change. That there is a sense of injustice, and it ties to this idea. From my perspective, it ties to this idea of prediction error. So we react to something unjust or something wrong when we have a very clear idea of what is right and what is good. Okay? We have a clear prediction of how it should be. That's when the brain signals this is wrong. Okay? Now, what is right and what is good is, of course, can be a subjective perception, but it's something you learn through gathering data points, from sampling data, from knowledge, from experience. And I very much liked what Frans talked about when she talked about being critical about sources of information. So that's how you develop a good sense of what is right and good, and that's when you can have a strong sense of injustice. Yeah.
So, well, maybe this sounds reductive, but it's interesting. So injustice, in one way, is I think interesting. In one way, it's something about prediction. That something is wrong, but you expect a question of expectations. I haven't thought about it. It's a different way to think about it, I guess.
Yes.
But I mean, I guess moral convictions also play into it. But it's this is on a more. Is this on a more basic level?
It's a basic level, and it should be added that if this prediction error is coupled to a strong emotion, then you're even more likely to see a change. So emotions may play a big role. Yeah.
How do you study this? You look, you're a neuroscientist, you look at the brain, but is it just the brain, or do you look at how it sort of interacts with behavior and things?
Yes, so I combine behavior to brain activity studies. And what I have done in the past 5 or 6 years is to collaborate with researchers in education to make my studies more ecologically valid. So instead of being in an MR scanner or a little lab. So what we do is that kids learn in the classroom, and then the day after we take them to the MR scanner to see how does the brain look when you have actually learned in a fairly natural environment.
Does the brain change that fast? I mean,
yes.
Day to day, that's amazing. I thought it would be like over years.
No, no. From minute to minute, yes.
So my brain is changing as we speak?
Yes.
Oh,
yes.
Wow. Okay. So that brings us to the question of group identity, but also personal. I guess I'm changing as well who I am, if my brain is changing.
Yes,
okay.
That's correct. So the way I view self and self-identity, and others with me, of course, is that the self is made up of nodes in a network, nodes of association. So honesty, kind, tall, perhaps, like a network of nodes that are me, identifies me. Now, it's regulated by neurons in the medial prefrontal cortex, and those neurons are very, very close to neurons of our perception of others. So self-identity and group identity are, from a brain perspective, very similar. Now, these nodes, associative networks, change based on experience, what I see and what I learn and what I do. If I, for example, am in a context, a group of people every single day where I'm the shortest person, I will get a very strong connection in my self-identity network that I'm short. Whereas if I move around in different contexts where I'm sometimes the tallest, sometimes the shortest, sometimes in between, my idea of my height will become much more nuanced and may not even matter that much to my identity. So we can help shape identities by creating contexts for people.
So is that also the link then to being an agent of change, that it depends on what context you're in? Or
it's been shown in research that people who are prone to want to create changes are these people who feel injustice and have a quite strong group identity. I want to fight for my group and I want justice.
So you want to fight for a group and you want justice and you have self-efficacy, so you feel that you're able to do it.
Absolutely. Self-efficacy is so important, and that is based on competence rather than how fun something is. When we ask people how fun did you find the task to be, it doesn't really predict much. It's more how competent do I feel I am.
Oh, that's interesting. So it's more about being competent than having fun. Well, Isak, do you have any questions from the audience? I mean, I could sit for another hour asking more questions about this, but I think we'll have to let someone else in as well.
Yes, yes, we have plenty of questions coming in. Here's one about self-efficacy. If a student repeatedly fails in school tasks, I should give him or her a task where he or she succeeds. Is this correct? And if the answer is yes, how can I make that student cope with educational standards? Do you understand the question?
Yes, I mean, I view it, I have a simplistic view, and I respect that your life as teachers are much more complex. But I view learning beneficial learning very much like a computer game. You are on level 1, and you have to repeat and repeat and repeat level 1 until you are good enough to step up to level 2. And then you repeat and repeat and repeat. So I would say, yes, do give the student a task they can pass, but only pass through repetitions and learning, through hard work, if you wish. Then they can take the next step. Now, the next step shouldn't be too high. It should be reasonable, harder. And I would say, well, how can this student pass the academic standards? You will have to provide the resources needed for this student to pass. It's the school's task, I find.
One more?
Yeah, sure.
when does the brain stop to evolve? Sometimes I can feel that my brain has become a stone.
Yes.
From one of the teachers.
Yes. No, but when I did my PhD at Karolinska Institutet, I worked with Fredrik Ullén, who is a famous pianist, and we did a study where we looked at the white matter of the brain. The white matter is the insulation that makes sure the signals traveling between two areas don't leak out on the way, right? So the white matter is fat. And we did a very successful study where we showed that pianists have thicker insulation than non-pianists in areas important for finger movements. We saw that the ones that had the thickest myelin was those that had been practicing a lot early in life, from the age of 4 and 5, right? But interestingly, we also saw changes in people in my age and older. So the brain is capable of changing. Something we may not have thought about or thought was the case 25 years ago. We now know from many, many brain imaging studies that the old brain is still changing. As soon as you can learn something new, you know that the brain has changed. It's very simple. You have the evidence.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's all the time that we have, unfortunately, but we're on to something interesting as well. Thank you so much for your questions, and thank you, Sara, for this.
Thank you. Thank you.
Very interesting. Sara Bengtsson made my brain explode, I think. And I understand now that Vygotsky was right, even though, unfortunately, Vygotsky's pedagogics and didactics might be very hard to implement with 35 students in the classroom, as you might know. But thank you very much, Sara. It's my privilege to introduce Ahmed Abdirahman, the founder and CEO of the non-profit organization, the Global Village Foundation. This foundation is dedicated to initiatives such as Järvaveckan. I think all the Swedish participants here know about Järvaveckan. It's aimed at bridging the gap between citizens and policymakers. And Mr. Abdirahman brings such a wealth of experience to his role, having served as a former expert on social sustainability at the Stockholm Chamber of Commerce. His previous roles includes positions at the American Embassy in Stockholm and with Interpeace, an international peace-building organization headquartered in Geneva. Please join me in welcoming Ahmed Abdirahman.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here, and I'm very surprised to see so many of you here. It's like I thought it was going to be a smaller room, so hopefully I will make it through. But thank you very much for this amazing introduction and for the opportunity. My name is Ahmed Abdirahman, and as you mentioned, I'm the CEO of Järvaveckan. I'm also Obama leader and David Raka Fellow of the Trilateral Commission, as well as the honorary receiver of Raoul Wallenberg Academy Prize. Coming here has been a long journey, of course. As you have heard, a lot of titles, which I'm very proud of. I think we Swedes have to learn to stick up a little bit and not be, how do you say, lagom, as we say in Sweden. But coming here has been a long journey. And I'm going to go through that journey and explain to you why it is important to have an inclusive education and empowering teachers, the power of that, and what it can make for someone like myself. My journey has been long. As you can see here, I migrated from the civil war in Somalia, Mogadishu, where I grew up with my mother and my brother. My father lived in Sweden, and because of the civil war and the clan war, my parents couldn't be together. So I grew up with a single mother in Mogadishu. I had pretty much no formal education when my father came to Somalia to take us back to his family in Sweden. So overnight, as you can imagine, I left, as you can see these images from the capital of Somalia, Mogadishu, in the civil war with a little bit of food and pretty much no peace throughout 12 years of my life, to one of the most peaceful countries in the world, Sweden and Stockholm. And that's my little brother myself when we were in Somalia, and that's the image is myself in the red tie and my little brother in the other one, and that's my mother. I realized that even though I came to one of the most peaceful countries in the world, I realized after a while that I came also to one of the most challenging societies in the suburbs that is hugely segregated. And as you probably have heard in the news for the last days you've been here, there's been a lot of shootings, a lot of problems, especially in areas that are populated by immigrants like myself who are new to Sweden. So in Sweden we have 60 areas that are called vulnerable areas, and around 500,000 people live there. Majority are born outside of Europe, mostly from the Middle East and North Africa like myself. And a lot of them are young people. In the area where I grew up in Rinkeby-Tensta, which is very famous, 42% are under the age of 25. So young people coming to Sweden or young people born to parents that are from outside of Europe, which has a lot of impact on school and education, especially segregated schools, which I grew up in. It's also an area where you have a low income, where you earn pretty much half, if not less, of the average salary in Stockholm. So these challenges have impacted me very much. I grew up in an area where the police has been always present and where the challenges has been dominant compared to the rest of the city. But when I came to Sweden, I knew that I was a person who wanted to have a good education, who wanted to make a difference, given that I came from a country where I knew people like myself didn't have the same chance to come to a peaceful country. But it's not easy growing up in a suburb where the previous speaker mentioned that people are bullied just by being who they are. And if you are a young man, particularly, who want to get education, who is serious about his or her future in a suburb that is not supported, it's very difficult for that. So that became for me very important. But I was lucky enough to have amazing teachers, as you can see in this picture, who believed in me and who really cared about my future and who showed me that don't care about what other young people are saying about you, don't care about the society that is not says against you, believe in yourself. And the question that has been always asked to me by my teachers was not, what do you want to become as a job, but what do you want to do to change? What do you want to change in the world to make it better? And I knew what I wanted to change in the world, given that my background was from a civil war. So, but that's not enough. It's not only enough to know what you want to change. It's also dealing with coming to a country that is, from one night, 99% of my population in Somalia was Somalis like myself, Muslim, coming to a country with different language, different culture, different weather. You have a lot of questions growing up as a young person. What it means to be black, what it means to be a Muslim, what it means to be a Swedish, what it means to be from the suburbs. So all these questions were in my head, and that's something that the educational system hasn't always been good at addressing. We are teaching for becoming doctors, or for becoming engineers, or for becoming something, but not always becoming a citizen, becoming a global citizen, becoming a citizen who understands what it means to be a human being. And those questions were not answered for me, which has been difficult for me in a country that has, a lot of them are not like myself. So when I look at TV and I see, for example, trying to understand my background, because as a young person, you are searching always for what it means to be from a certain country, a certain place, what makes you different, what makes you unique. When I look at Google, when I look at the news, these are the images that I see about being a Muslim person. And think about it now, this is after 9/11, when I came after 9/11, which has a lot of bearing on how Muslims are viewed, especially in the Western world. So we are always being seen in an image of terrorist organizations where women are subjugated and where there's no individuality. And there's no foundation for peace between living in a Western world and having a Muslim background. So this clash, even though no one is saying that racist thing in your face, you always feel that media and the society around you has an image of who you are already before you even open your mouth. So that has been very difficult for me and have been very difficult for many young people, which is the reason why we have seen young people leaving Western countries to join terror organizations, because they found that easier to connect to people who actually want to destroy our world and our peace and our democracy rather than the country they grew up in that has given them everything. So it's a very important issue in educational system not to only address math and teaching, but teaching for the whole child, teaching for the whole world. But I was lucky, and when I went to the US on a scholarship, I went to a school that actually finally provided this answer, what it means to be a global citizen, what it means to learn for learning, to learn for life, to learn what it means to be a human being rather than just something that someone else is categorizing you in. So the school that I went to was in East Hampton in New York, and where cultural history has been the core of the curriculum. And that cultural history is not as has been in this part of the world, in where I grew up in Sweden, Western cultural history, but world cultural history. So I was surrounded by, as you can see, the arts in this gallery here. This is the school itself. This is where young students who are in high school are wandering through, seeing culture from all around the world, not only Western, but from China, from all other parts of the world. So the approach has been then, how do you create a students who understand the responsibility of being global citizens? What does it mean to be a global citizen? What our responsibility is in a new age where we are connected more than ever? So this has been very important to me, and this is where I found even more the power that a teacher can make for a difference for a young person like myself. My teachers finally helped me to understand my history as well, not only what it means to be Western history in this country, but also my history. My history was not ignored, being African, being a Muslim. So actually my teachers brought me to Spain, and maybe a lot of you perhaps know, some of you are from all around the world, that Spain has been a Muslim country and kingdom for many, many years. And this is where a lot of the Renaissance actually started there before it came to Europe. So I went to Alhambra and I saw these amazing buildings and architecture and art and people from all kind of walks, all kind of different religions, Jewish, Christians, every religion working together peacefully as much as possible to create a better world for the future. And for the first time I understood that my history was not defined by the 21st century of terrorists who are called Muslims, but by a generation of scholars from everything from the father of Al-Shabra to astronomy to medicine to, you name it, optics. A rich history that is not only Muslim as from the Middle East, but Muslims from all around the world contributed to. And that I could find and I could hook that to the world that I'm coming from as a new Swedish Western European new citizen, that the history of this world is longer than just the Renaissance in Europe or the medieval history. So that has made a very important impact on my life. But it's also made an impact for me to understand that the image of Muslims are not what people show on TV. It's much larger than that. You could be a doctor, you could be a woman who has a scar head or not. All of this is part of being a citizen, being a global citizen who understand that you can decide what you want to be. You don't have to choose what people want you to see and choose for themselves. So this is what happened to me then. Because of my mentors and my teachers, that I realized that I have a responsibility, and my responsibility is worldwide. And that responsibility starts in the country that had made me a home and gave me peace and education. So I actually became a citizen outside of Sweden in terms of, citizen in the heart, not only in passport. And this is why it's important to have teachers who teach for the whole child and trying to understand the identity that we need as a young person when we grow up, not only a grade, but identity. So I returned to Sweden and I decided that I don't want to be a part of society that limits young people, especially people with my background, young people from different parts of the world, to an image of what we have seen in the news. I want to be a part of a new world where I can help build bridges between different cultures and celebrate diversity, and to include people economically, socially in Sweden, where my home is. So that's why I've started to help break that barrier that has been there between young people and the police, especially in our community. So I started events like outdoor cinema, where we could show movies from all around the world to celebrate our rich cultural history as well as connect that to our new home, to our new citizens, to our new brothers and sisters in Sweden, especially also with the police force in a young age, so the young people and the parents have a trust to the authorities that so far has been lacking in our community. But also to teach young people that tomorrow's Sweden belongs to all of us, that even though we have a different color on our skin, our names are different, we come from different part of the world, we might be born here with different parents, this is also our home, and we're going to live together for hundreds of years, and we have a responsibility for that society that we can be a part of creating and not feel outside of it. So we have arranged Järvaveckan, which is our annual event, and we have, this year we had 68,000 people who came together from all walks of life of Sweden. All the political leaders of Sweden usually go there every year. And we have artists from different parts of backgrounds, and together what we do is trying to build a new world where we can be ourselves as a country. And here are some more pictures from the event. We also celebrate young people so they can have their voice. It's very important that they are part of the solution and not seen as a problem. So we have young artists, we have panels with young people, and we tailor some of the event to young families and young people so they can be a part of that. At Järvaveckan, we also create a lot of jobs. For example, we have hired over 50 young people. Here are some of them for the first time, job on their side. But they are not only from the suburb where I'm from with immigrant background, but they also get to meet young people who have also Swedish backgrounds, so together they can work together. And this is now my family, and I'm very grateful to have a family that is now global. I have an American mother who's pretty much like a mother to me, even though I have a Somalian mother who's here in Sweden. And her family as well, and my brother who's married to a girl from Romania who became a doctor. There's a saying in the world that is, if you want to go far, you have to go together, and that's why it's very important to be surrounded by good people. So this is our board at the Global Village Foundation at Järvaveckan from the business sector, but it's also to be surrounded and be blessed by people who understand and who see you as someone who can make a difference. And that's why teachers, for me, are key in not only teaching, again, for a subject, for a grade, but teaching for the whole child and for the future. With that, I want to thank you all for listening, and I look forward to explaining more about Järvaveckan in my next session. Thank you.
So we live in a world where things go faster and faster. We are getting used to short and catchy explanations. But to understand what is really going on around the world, we need more than opinions and one-liners. We need reporters, we need journalists, and we need photographers. We are in need of those who are willing to seek the complex reality of every single dilemma and conflict. Journalist Martin Schibbye is one of those persons who wants to find out and then are willing to share it with us. Please, a warm hand to Martin Schibbye. After a journalistic assignment in the conflict-ridden Ogaden region in Ethiopia, you, Martin, and photographer Johan Persson was captured and innocently sentenced to 11 years in prison for terrorist crimes. You were sent to the infamous Kaliti prison in Addis Ababa in Ethiopia. After 438 days, you were pardoned and released. So, terrorist crimes. What was the real issue here? Why was your journalistic doings in the region so threatful and hostile in their eyes?
I mean, first of all, I'm privileged to be alive and to be here. Other colleagues who have tried to investigate the same story and who were from Ethiopian or Somali origin, they were shot and left, I mean, in the desert, or didn't survive the Kaliti prison. So it's a privileged, position to have the Swedish passport and to be able to get out. But I mean, the core issue was, as it always is, to find out who's lying and who is telling the truth. It was a lot written about this conflict, about oil in the Ogaden region. And some were saying, well, oil exploration is good for everyone. We will lift people out of poverty. We will develop the region. And then you had the stories from refugees telling about burned villages, areas that were cleaned to make room for foreign oil companies. And a lot of journalism is done that way. On one hand, on the other hand, and in the end time will tell. But I mean, we decided to try and find out who's lying, who's telling the truth, and then you need to go there. Use your feet more than Google, and go to the crime scenes and talk to the people. That was, yeah, the whole idea behind that story that we didn't succeed with because we were shot and, as you mentioned later on, convicted for terrorist crimes.
We are later today meeting Dmitry Muratov, and he has quoted Robert Capa, the war photographer, at some time, and he with a quote, "If your picture isn't good enough, you aren't close enough." So that's what you're saying. You need to be on site to understand.
Yeah, and it's kind of strange that you have to mention that as a journalist. I mean, for me, that is, you have to I mean, talk to the people that you're writing about, or visit the countries you're writing about. But we have gotten used to a lot of kind of desktop journalism where, due to resources and other, I mean, there are many excuses that a lot of journalism is being produced behind desks in Sweden instead of out there where things are happening. Yeah. But the thing that also made, I mean, the story sensitive was that, of course, I mean, Ethiopia at the time was ruled by one party, and they had these new terrorism laws that basically criminalized journalism. Talking to someone who was, you know, not a government spokesperson or didn't represent the official government version, talking to such a group which were labeled as a terrorist group, then yourself you would be sentenced for, you know, moral support of terrorism. And I mean, in order to do my job as a journalist, the whole idea is to speak to both sides, to get everyone's best arguments in order to be able to publish quality journalism, and that was basically criminalized. And that's not only, I mean, the case in Ethiopia. You have a lot of countries all over the world where they are using national security legislation or terrorist legislation to basically criminalize dissent.
It sounds like the journalism that are seeking the truth in the way you explain it, that's the slow journalism. You need time to do so.
Yeah, I mean, patience is much more important than courage, I'd say. And there, I mean, it's also been called the art of hanging around, and to have that time in order to wait for stories, etc. So, I mean, I think there are many. There are lots of good journalism being done, but really one of my favorites, I don't know if you follow him, but as a teacher, it's really someone to follow. His name is Paul Solopek. He works for National Geographic, and he's doing this Out of Eden walk, he calls it. He started in Ethiopia, where you found Lucy and the first human signs of humanity, and then he follows in the footsteps of humankind, you know, out to Africa, Asia, and he's walking around the globe. And I think he had a plan for like 6 or 7 years. I think now he's year 9 or 10, and he's late, and he's somewhere in Asia. But he's, I mean, writing dispatches along the way, and I mean that is really slow journalism in its, I mean, essence, and it's something. I mean, so nice not to come with an airplane and have, you know, a couple of days to do your story and then fly back home, but to actually come walking. I came from that village. What's happening here? What are the issues for the day here? And that's also a way of, you know, getting away from, as you mentioned, these quick headlines and the quick stories where you already know the narrative, or you already have, okay, I'm covering these conflicts. These are the answers I will get from these, from A, B, and C, etc. But tomorrow, come and ask people what's the story of your life? What do you want to tell? It's a very humble way of working that, I try to find inspiration from.
I mean, if you're a teacher and you want to encourage your students to read the news and get information and get involved. How can you guide in the navigation of this? Because it is a it is a palette of fake facts, manipulated pictures, and disinformation and whatever. What is the compass in all this?
I think that we are in a really tough situation. I mean, when I go out in a school today in Sweden, the students have been taught by all your teachers to don't trust anyone, to criticize everything. And they have this kind of view of the world affected by, I mean, source criticism, to be critical of everything. Like, it's just fake news, people are trying to cheat you, people are trying this propaganda, etc., etc. And then immediately, I mean, facing that criticism, how do we know that you are a journalist? How do we know that you, just came back from Dubai? How do we know that you took this picture? In a way, it's good that people have been taught to think critical, but I think that this kind of war on fake news has gone a bit too long. I would say ceasefire on teaching people to be critical. Might sound strange and like maybe like swearing in church here, but I think we're in a dangerous situation where media is criticized as media in a way that's not really fair. And I think we need to focus on, okay, why can you trust professional journalism? And it's not just, I mean, the fault of your teacher. We have a responsibility as well as journalists to really show that it's a craft. How do we work? Okay, this is how I pack my bag. This is my research. These are the people I talk to before going to this country. These are my questions. And I think the way to get, students involved is to let them follow with you, producing that journalism. Climb down from the ivory tower and show your, strengths and weaknesses. Show them the questions you are going to ask, the people that you plan to talk to, the people that you did talk to, but they didn't end up in the finished story. And then when everything is, finished and published, they will understand, okay, how was this story made? They will understand it took 2-3 months, it took travels, it took, phone calls, it was really costly. And then they could see the difference between, this is a journalistic product with an editor-in-chief and with a process to check the facts. And it's been published on a magazine that is, a responsible magazine connected to the ethical press system in Sweden. That's something different from just a blog post or just a YouTuber or something else. But I think we need to, defend journalism much more than we criticize journalism, because, I say we're at a very dangerous crossroad, and it's so easy when everyone says, well, it's just fake news, or, journalists, they are just lying, and they are just blah, blah, blah. If you hear someone say something racist, people will put down their foot and say, no, stop, this, don't say this. But when people criticize journalists in a way that's not really fair, no one says stop, because it's so easy to just, yeah, I agree, it's just a lot of rubbish. And I'd say the situation is really, critical. It's not just in authoritarian countries or dictatorships. Also in Sweden, I don't see people standing up for journalists. I don't. I see everyone talking about fake news and how journalists lie and produce fake stuff. And we need, in a way, to change that discussion. I don't know how, but we can't do it on our own as journalists, because at the end of the day, we will need the listeners, the viewers, and the readers to stand up for what we do. And without your support, we don't stand a chance.
Especially thinking of what Nobel Prize Laureate Maria Ressa from the Philippines, a country where you have worked a lot with, said that lies spreads faster than truth, especially if they're laced with hate. So it is an unfair starting point when it comes to solid journalism and random opinions, hateful opinions on internet.
Yeah. One of my strongest memories from the PL is from the Philippines. I was there shortly after one of the major massacres on colleagues. At one point, they killed around 50 colleagues after a press conference in Mindanao, the south of the Philippines. And after that, there was, of course, a debate among Philippine journalists, like, what should we do? Should we arm ourselves? The government is not protecting us. We need to arm ourselves. But others were saying, no, we should just be more and more careful with following the ethics of journalism. We should always, talk to both sides, always let everyone say their best argument, never be the mouthpiece for this and that political party. Being able to basically do our work in a professional, ethical way, never be sloppy, etc., etc. That's the only way to stay alive and to keep reporting. And I'm not saying that journalists that are getting killed is not, that's not what I'm saying, but it seems like a wiser way to go to talk about ethics than to arm ourselves in order to be able to continue to work in a more polarized and dangerous world.
You and your colleague were imprisoned around 2011. Most of us can only vaguely imagine such an abuse, legally, physically, mentally, and how that can affect you as a person. The prison you were put in is also an environment that are aiming to diminish and dehumanize the prisoners. And furthermore, I guess also that this whole imprisonment as such aimed to prevent all future journalistic actions in the area. How did this, you are still doing what you're doing. How did this affect you as a journalist?
I'd say you get more determined that, journalism has a important role to play. The value of journalism, and in that prison, you could pay a police and you could get in. People were paying police and bribing police officers and getting, weapons in or drugs in or all different kind of things. But how much money? It didn't matter how much you offered. No one would dare to, bring, paper with text on or books or magazines and of course that was kind of tough in that situation, not having things to read or not having any news. But looking back, it says something very important about kind of the power of the written word. That what are these countries afraid of? Well, it's basically text on paper in books or in papers or digitally, and that's something we should never forget. Really, the power of journalism, and of course it pushed me to continue. Also, to keep a promise to the ones that were still left when I got out. The local journalists that is the most dangerous profession you could have. To report from the safe environment that you live in. As a foreign correspondent, you are extremely privileged to go home and write your stories. Survivor's guilt also, I guess, played into it. But maybe also as the brain researcher before, it's all I know, so I just have to continue traveling and writing to, yeah.
Based in values about freedom of expression.
Yeah.
A warm hand to Martin Schibbye.
Thank you.
I will introduce to you Ahmed Badr. He is an Iraqi-American author, professor, and multimedia artist. Ahmed Badr is the director of the Patrielli Center. You have to help me here, but do that later. Of the Patrielli Center for Social Entrepreneurship and adjunct assistant professor of public policy at Wesleyan University. At 25, Ahmed is the youngest senior staff and faculty member in the university's 192-year history. And as a teen, Ahmed founded Narratio, an organization, an online platform that activates, supports, and highlights the creative expression of displaced youth and young people through fellowship, workshops, publishing, and partnership. Please give a warm hand to Ahmed Badr.
thank you letter from the bomb that visited my home. Dear Ahmed, I knew that I was going to change your life. I knew that as soon as I entered your old home in Baghdad. Your dad Matham was holding your sister Maryam in the kitchen. Your mom Hannah was near the dryer. I found a place between them. You were away at your grandparents' home, so we didn't get to meet. You didn't know this at the time, but I was a dud missile, designed to destroy but not explode. I entered your home through the bathroom window, made my way through the walls of the kitchen cabinet, and sneaked through 3 natural gas canisters. You know, those old school ones your mom used for cooking? I'm sorry for leaving gaping holes through each one. I was in a rush. Good thing your dad emptied them out 2 days before my visit. I've been reading your articles. I noticed that you mentioned me a lot, which first made me feel very uncomfortable. I'm not used to being recognized. I usually turn children like you and your sister into dust. When I meet new people, my palms tend to be bloody. Haven't you always wondered why your dad rarely spoke about me? He told you that tragedies always ended with a period. Yours ended with a semicolon. You moved on to great things, but I was still there, watching. Most tragedies never fully disappear. They share your breath, your blood, and walk around the ridges of your ribcage when they can't fall asleep. But you are different. For some reason, I couldn't live within you. I couldn't share your breath or your blood. You wouldn't let me. Maybe it's because you weren't there. I know that every night before you fall asleep, you ask yourself what would have happened if you were there to meet me. I'm writing to thank you. Thank you for using me for good. Know that my body changes location without my permission. I don't enjoy meeting new people. I don't relish in the destruction. I'm designed to collect breaths and keep them to myself. And no matter which side I'm working with, this purpose never changes. Us bombs never get to choose who to visit. You came back to visit me a few years ago, and you didn't see my body, of course, that was long gone, but you saw the window in the bathroom where I first introduced myself. It was now fixed, but I was still there. You were alone, and the rest of your family was outside. You took out your phone to take a picture of me, but you were out of storage. You laughed at the irony. You put your phone down and stared at me, and I stared back. You smiled and walked away. And in that moment, I realized that your survival is my only salvation. July 25th, 2006 is when my life changed. That is what this poem is talking about. It's that evening. And it was the first night I spent away from home, just 2 weeks before my 8th birthday. And the next day, my dad came to pick me up, and immediately I could tell that there was something off. We all know when there's something off with our parents. It's a look, it's a feeling. And I didn't want to say anything initially at first. And on the drive home, we stopped at a red light, and I decided to ask. I said, "Baba, what's wrong?" And he took one of those deep parental breaths, and he said, "Ahmed, our home was bombed last night." And I got home and saw for myself what had happened, and you saw in the poem exactly the route that the bomb took and what happened. 2 weeks later, we moved to Syria, which at the time was taking in refugees. We had an uncle there, and would end up staying in Syria for a little over 2 years. And during these 2 years, my parents were on paid leave. They were civil engineers in Baghdad for over 24 years, and would go back and forth. So we would visit family in Baghdad, and then we were in Aleppo for a while, and then on the coast of Syria. And at some point, they had to make a decision, because the paid leave was running out. Do we stay in Syria and be okay, be safe? but struggle financially? Or do we go back in Iraq and be okay financially, but struggle with safety? And during one of the bus rides, it's about a 6 to 8 hour bus ride between Baghdad and Aleppo, my dad was talking to the driver. And the driver mentioned this UN program that would resettle refugees to different parts of the world, to the US, the UK, Australia, and a few other places. And my dad thought, okay, we don't really have anything to lose, and he applied. Decided to apply, and over the next year and a half or so, we were, traveled all around Syria doing interviews with the UNHCR, the UN Refugee Agency. And then, about a year and a half later, I remember we were living near the coast, Mediterranean coast in Syria, in a small town called Schibbye. And I was in my bedroom. My mom was in the living room, and all of a sudden I hear my mom yelling. She's like, yelled. And usually when my mom yells, it's never anything good. Usually I did something wrong. And I rushed into the living room, and I find out that she had just received a call letting her know that we had 4 one-way tickets to Sioux Falls, South Dakota, in the United States. And about a week or two later, we arrived in the US, May 19th, 2008. And a new chapter had begun. And in high school, I started to think about this story and what it meant for me and my own kind of relationship to the US and the different identities. I asked myself, what does it mean to be an Iraqi American Muslim refugee? Can I claim all of these things at once? Are they mine to claim at once? Are the tensions in between them insurmountable? Or can I reconcile all of them and combine them into something that was uniquely my own? The summer after my second year in high school, I received a scholarship to go to a journalism conference in Washington, D.C. And for this conference, they said you had to create a blog for your work. And I went all out. I got business cards, I got a domain name, and I started putting out short poems and essays that I had written. And that week in Washington changed everything. For the first time, I realized that my ability to share my own story was powerful, and that there were other young people and others in general that were interested in this exploration of what it meant to be at the center of these various identities. So I got home. We had moved down to Texas from South Dakota, and about a year later I realized that this was great, but this was just for me. Why not make it something that could be more widely available to other young people, displaced or otherwise? And so that's how Narratio was born, an organization really designed to activate the creative power of the world's displaced young people. And we started out very small. I begged my classmates, in high school to share their work so we can publish it online. Our first 10 posts had, a couple of poems, a short film, an essay, a couple of photographs. And over the last 7 years, we've continued to build this organization, and now our flagship project is now the only US-based fellowship specifically aimed at activating the power of displaced young people via storytelling and leadership. There are now over 100 million displaced individuals across the world. If you look up that word, refugee, oftentimes the images that you see and the stories that you hear are really dominated by dehumanizing narratives that are devoid of any power or agency. How can we be expected to understand this population if the dominant representations are like this? This is where our program comes in. Over the last 5 years, we've been able to work with over 80 fellows, and collectively, they've produced over 350 pieces of artwork, short films, poems, photographs, and visual art that have reached over 3 million people around the world. But the key part of the program is that it tries to answer this question. What does it mean to share your own story on your own terms? So the program has 4 components. 1, there's an artist in residence who's always an immigrant or refugee themselves. There's a community center that helps us recruit the fellows. And there is a university that helps us connect fellows across educational trajectories. And then the last component is the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York, our central partner. The central exercise that we work with is that the fellows every year pick objects from the Metropolitan Museum's collection and rewrite their labels as poems, but according to their own personal histories, identities, and memories. And once a year, for the past 5 years, they get to perform that work at the Metropolitan Museum. And really, really critically here is that when they're entering these spaces, they're not entering them as refugee youth. They're entering them as cultural producers. They're entering as writers, as storytellers, as artists. And there's a key distinction here that I want us all to keep in mind. If there's one thing you get out of this talk, is that there's a distinction between a refugee story and the story of someone who happens to be a refugee. We're on a mission to transform how the world engages with and accesses and activates the creative potential of displaced young people. And again, it goes back to that question of what does it mean to be able to share your own story on your own terms. In 2019, on July 31st of 2019, was the very first performance at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, the first class of Narratio Fellows. We had 11 fellows who had engaged in that exercise that I mentioned, had written poems inspired by the collection. And it was about 5:30 or so, or it was about 10 minutes before the performance was about to start. And one of the fellows had wandered off to get something, and the area was cordoned off, it was kind of separate. And the fellow came back, and there was, there's a lot of security, and the security said, "Sorry, there's a performance happening." And in that moment, the fellow looked at them and said, "Yes, I'm the performance." And they went inside. Now, this is a very, very simple moment. This is a very simple interaction, but it goes at the impact that we're trying to create in this world. This idea of not just what does it mean to share your own story on your own terms, but what spaces can your own story create for other stories to exist beside it and beyond it. And this is something that's incredibly, incredibly personal. I had the privilege of starting to share my story, of recognizing that I had a story to tell, when I was 16, 17 years old. And it took me several years to recognize the stakes of my own story and its telling. And quite frankly, after a few years, I realized I didn't want to be the inspiring refugee. I didn't want to be the inspiring refugee that came to conferences and told their story of difficulty, of tragedy, and then there were teary eyes in the audience, and then people would come up to me after and say, "I'm so sorry." And that's, again, people mean well, and I'm not saying that is a negative thing, but I just didn't want that anymore. And in 2017, I made a kind of a decision that I will never do any engagement if it wasn't linked to this larger infrastructure that we're trying to build with organization, Narratio, and with this larger movement we're trying to build, of these two kinds of ecosystems. One, where displaced young people around the world are connected to one another, where they feel comfortable sharing the stories that they directly shape and influence and directly control, but also an ecosystem of institutions that are ready to receive this expression and highlight it and amplify it in ways that not just serve those institutions, but the young people we work with and the communities that they belong to. These kinds of ecosystems are so, so important. And it's not just about increasing the amount of stories, but it's increasing the amount of stories that are told with agency and with nuance and with complexity. I didn't want my story to be the only one anymore. Again, thinking about the capacity of stories to create spaces for other stories to exist at the same time. I have my parents to thank for so much of my life. Not just with their resilience of coming to the US, their just remarkable power in what they do as civil engineers. I didn't end up being a civil engineer, but did some other things. And I'll never forget what my dad told me early on when I started this journey, storytelling. He said that stories are like windshield wipers during a storm. They won't get rid of all of the rain, but they will make our way clearer. Thank you very much.
The Nobel Peace Prize of 1935, some time ago, was awarded to the German journalist Karl von Ossietzky. He could never receive his Nobel Prize because he had years earlier been put into a concentration camp by the Nazis. He had, as a journalist, over and over again raised a critical voice to German militarism at the time, and for this he was accused of being a spy. In 2021, another two journalists was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. As with Karl von Ossietzky, Dmitry Muratov from Russia and Maria Ressa from the Philippines are dedicated to independent journalism, and they have published revealing articles on corruption and abuse of power in their ongoing search for the truth. Please, a very warm welcome on stage, Nobel Peace Prize laureate from 2021, Dmitry Muratov. And also welcome Vadim Belenki, who will help us to translate between Russian and English. There you are. Welcome, Belenki. So, in 1993, to say the least, a very dynamic time in Russia, the Russian independent newspaper Novaya Gazeta was published for the very first time. And you, Mr. Muratov, you were engaged from the very beginning. Can you recall the dream and vision that you had when you started this newspaper?
Вы знаете, после 24 февраля 2022 года все мечты кажутся идиотскими.
After the 24th of February 2022, all the dreams, they seem to be quite idiotic.
Мне кажется, тогда казалось, что медиа, пресса должны в интересах общества контролировать государство. Но, видите, мы не справились с этим, и началась то, что сейчас в России называют специальной военной операцией в Украине. Это означает, мы проиграли, свободная пресса проиграла.
At the time, I believed that the media, the press, should control the government, the state, on behalf of the society, but we didn't succeed. And what happened instead is that what started with what is called in Russia a special military operation, which means that we haven't succeeded, that we have lost.
So almost 30 years have passed, and reality and society have obviously then, as you say, changed. How is the situation today for Novaya Gazeta and media in general in Russia?
Ну, то, что касается «Новой газеты». «Новую газету» лишили права называться СМИ, она больше не является медиа, государство отозвало у нас лицензию. Часть журналистов уехала, они в эмиграции, часть продолжает вместе со мной работать в Москве. Самое главное, из страны уехало несколько десятков независимых от государства медиа, и российские журналисты в изгнании продолжают выполнять свою миссию по информированию людей о той правде, с которой мы столкнулись во время специальной военной операции в Украине. К сожалению, журналистика, независимой журналистики в России не осталось совсем. Давайте это зафиксируем.
Well, let's start with Novaya Gazeta. The Novaya Gazeta, the newspaper, lost its is no longer a media source. The state revoked its license. Some of the journalists, they emigrated. Some are still in Moscow working with me, and there are more than 10 independent media outlets which have left Russia and which have moved into exile, and where they continue with their mission to inform the public about the truth about the special military operation in Ukraine. However, the independent journalism as such doesn't exist in Russia any longer, and this is something which has to be just admitted.
У нас был слоган для газеты. Я вчера вам говорил его. Новая газета никогда... Она договорилась, эта газета, что она ниже пояса не бьет и не лижет. Нельзя ниже пояса бить и лизать. Но теперь в России можно ниже пояса только лизать, потому что основным медиа в России стала пропаганда.
And I told you this yesterday. We had this slogan that Novaya Gazeta is a newspaper, would not hit under the belt, but would not also lick under the belt. Today, you can only lick under the belt. So what's left in Russia is not media, instead it's propaganda.
It is a great label, but it has also costed immensely, not compromising with truth and journalism as such. 6 journalists from Novaya Gazeta have been murdered. Anna Politkovskaya is one of them. She was shot outside her home in Moscow in 2006. And Novaya Gazeta, the entire staff, and you as well, has endured threats, attacks, and imprisonments. Since a couple of weeks ago, you are now on the list of foreign agents, a label used by the Russian regime to stifle criticism. What does this label, this accusation, mean to you in practice?
Вы знаете, я не хочу, когда в соседней стране гибнут люди, говорить о своих проблемах. Я надеюсь, вы меня правильно поймете.
I hope that you will understand me correctly. When people are dying in the neighboring country, I don't want to speak about my own problems.
Sorry.
Totally understandable. I mean, in Russia today, there are support for the regime, but there is also criticism. Have I understood it correctly if there is a generation gap between being critical and not being critical?
Это правда. Может быть, вам, как учителям, это будет интересно. Но у нас абсолютно активную поддержку и президенту, и его политике в отношении Украины и мира поддерживает старшее поколение людей, 60+. Они не все, конечно, но это опора президента. Президент опирается на этих людей. Это люди, которые, в общем, о которых не очень заботились их внуки. Это люди, которые стали одинокими, и власть вернула им смысл жизни, что они снова нужны, и нужно поддержать действия президента.
This is true, and for you as teachers, this might be quite interesting. So, if you look at active supporters of the president, his foundation, this is mainly people who belong to the older generation, maybe 60+. Not all of them, but they are the foundation on which the president supports his policies. And these are people who've been neglected, maybe neglected by their grandkids. They feel lonely, and now they have received a sort of sense of purpose in their life, where they're needed to support the president and support the president's policies globally and with respect to Ukraine.
А поколение в возрасте от 18 до 40 лет – это пацифистское поколение, это поколение, которое хочет мирных переговоров. Более 80% молодого поколения, то есть ваших учеников, и во всем мире приблизительно так, они за мирные переговоры, они не понимают, зачем воевать, они не хотят убивать, они не хотят быть убитыми, они относятся к государственным границам так же, как к своим личным границам. Это очень важно. И это поколение поддерживает мир, и это поколение поддерживает нашу газету.
And we have the generation who are 18 to 40, and this is a generation of pacifists who are for peaceful negotiations. The surveys show that about 80% support are for peace. They don't understand why this is happening, why it's needed. They don't want to kill, they don't want to be killed, and they consider the state boundaries more or less the same manner as they consider they're more interested in their personal boundaries. And this is the generation who are, among other things, they are your students and who are for peace.
Очень сложно, но я попробую объяснить. Старшее поколение, которое не будет в силу своего возраста участвовать в боевых действиях, хочет, чтобы молодое поколение, которое не хочет воевать, шло и воевало.
So it's a bit difficult, but I'll try to explain this. The older generation, which due to its age will not take part in combat, they want the younger generation who doesn't want to take part in combat to take part in combat.
I mean, being critical or being skeptical towards this whole machinery is in spite of a massive propaganda, as I understand it. And propaganda is for sure not a Russian phenomenon, it's a global phenomenon. We all take part of it, and we all are probably misled by it. How is the propaganda machinery working in Russia today?
В этом смысле пропаганда в моей стране не очень отличается от того, что происходит по всему миру.
Well, in that respect, the propaganda in my country is not very different from what happens globally.
Многие из нас, я думаю, что кто-то из вас тоже, думали о том, что государство владеет телевидением, а общество управляет интернетом. И есть двухпартийная система телевидения и система интернета. Интернет — это про свободу и мир, а телевизор — это про пропаганду и режим.
And I think many of us, and probably many of you, have thought that the state controls the television and the society controls the internet. So it's a kind of a bipartisan system with television and the internet. So the internet is about freedom and peace, and the television is about propaganda and about the regime.
Однако теперь государство великолепно работает в интернете, оно стало крупнейшим интернет-игроком, и мы видим, что основные месседжи пропаганды, они идут через социальные сети, они идут через анонимные каналы в социальных сетях и в мессенджерах. Огромное количество ботов, целая информационная армия несуществующих людей формируют общественное мнение. Они вбрасывают то, что у нас называется фейк-ньюс. И уже человечеству очень сложно определить, где фейк, где не фейк. Я предложу вам очень простой критерий. Как только вы встречаетесь с анонимной новостью, это фейк.
But nowadays the state has learned very well how to use the internet, how to deal with the internet, and the bulk of the massive propaganda comes through the internet, through social media, through anonymous channels in social media, in the messengers. There's an army of bots, which there is a army of non-existent people which form the public opinion, which shape the public opinion, which spread the fake news, and it's difficult for one to distinguish what is fake and what is not. And can propose you a simple method to distinguish between what's fake and what's not. If the news come from an anonymous source, then it's fake.
Now, this is a gigantic problem for every country and every profession, and not the least being a teacher. And I know that you have a request for teachers or addressing teachers. What is it, Mr. Muratov?
Я приготовил небольшое обращение и небольшое письмо для вас.
I prepared a short address and a short letter for you.
Сначала короткая речь, а потом я скажу, какое письмо я хотел бы, чтобы мы вместе с вами подписали.
So first a short speech, and then I would like to tell you about the letter which I would like you to sign.
Спасибо.
Thank you.
Меня на днях спросили, как бы я определил, что такое война.
Recently I was asked how I would define what is war.
Война — это уничтожение труда учителей. Их ученики возвращаются в гробах.
And I said that war is destruction of a teacher's labor. Their disciples return in coffins.
На той военной операции, на той войне, которая сейчас идет, погибло в Европе. Погибло по разным подсчетам. Я говорю минимальную цифру. Погибло приблизительно 100 тысяч человек. Каждый из них не дожил до конца своей жизни приблизительно 40 лет. Период недожития каждого – это 40 лет. Это означает, что уничтожено приблизительно 4 миллиона лет для будущего. Там есть перевод.
And at this military operation, at this war which is ongoing in Europe, there are estimates that at least 100,000 of people have been killed. And this means that on average, the period of sort of underlife of each victim is how much this person has lived, is about 40 years. And this means that already about 4 million years of future lives have been destroyed.
Пропаганда в разных странах готовит людей к тому, что и ядерная война – это, в общем, нормально. Это современная технология. Ничего страшного в ядерной войне нет.
And the propaganda in different countries prepares everyone saying that even nuclear war is not very bad. It's modern technologies, and it's normal, nothing to fear.
Моя коллега, она лауреат Нобелевской премии мира 2017 года, Беатрис Финн, вместе с учеными создали модель современной ядерной войны.
And my colleague, Beatrice Finn, who is the winner of the 2017 Nobel Prize, she, together with other scientists, they created a model of what would happen in a modern nuclear war.
Погибнут 420 миллионов человек. Это в 7 раз больше, чем во время Второй мировой войны.
420 million people will get killed. That's 7 times more than in World War II.
150 миллионов тонн сажи от сгоревших людей, городов, лесов поднимутся в небо, и на земле прекратится урожай.
150 million tons of soot from burned cities, bodies, fields and forests will rise to the sky, and there'll no longer be any harvest on Earth.
Сотни миллионов беженцев, эпидемия, дефицит чистой воды.
Hundreds of millions of refugees, epidemics, shortage of clean water.
Вот что такое современная ядерная война, о которой хотят этой правды не говорить различные пропагандисты.
This is what modern nuclear war is, and this is the truth which the modern propagandists don't want to tell you about.
Никто из нас не знает, нажмут эту кнопку или не нажмут.
And none of us knows whether anyone will push the button or not.
Впервые мир в такой ситуации.
And this is the first time the world is in a situation like that.
Но очень важно понять, что происходит сейчас. с начала специальной военной операции в Украине уже разрушено 1300 школ.
But it's also important to understand what's happening today. Since the beginning of the special military operation, 1,300 schools have been destroyed in Ukraine.
Каждую минуту, пока мы здесь сидим, каждую минуту беженцами становится 55 детей.
Every minute we're sitting here, 55 children become refugees.
Таких детей уже больше 3 миллионов.
There are more than 3 million of these children already.
В мире больше нет локальных конфликтов.
And there are no longer any local conflicts in the world.
Вот прямо сейчас, когда мы сидим в этом зале, и многие в своих странах, вы про это знаете, 262 миллиона человек испытывают острый голод прямо сейчас.
And while we're sitting here in this room, a lot of you know this, 262 million people are experiencing acute hunger right now.
Мы здесь сидим, и перед тем, как перейти к ланчу, нам всем надо помнить, что каждые 3 секунды от голода сейчас умирает один ребенок.
And we're sitting in this room, and before we go and have lunch, we should remember that every 3 seconds, one child dies because of hunger.
Просто от отсутствия еды в день на земле сейчас умирает 10 тысяч детей в день.
Just because of lack of food, there are 10,000 children who die a day globally.
Я вам сейчас отдам фотографии. Их сделал замечательный фотограф украинский Евгений Малолетко. Его фильм, он соавтор фильма, который сейчас выдвинут на премию «Оскар» документального фильма.
And I will pass along the tables photos which were taken by a fantastic Ukrainian photographer, Yevhen Maloletko, and his documentary film has now been nominated for Oscar.
Это дети, беженцы с Украины, это еще живые дети. Передайте, пожалуйста.
You could pass them on. These children are refugees from Ukraine. They're still alive.
А вот это уже не живые.
And this one is not.
Вот это раненые
This is
дети.
An injured child.
Возьмите, потом верните сюда.
Please, and then you can please give it back to us later.
Это так кормят детей, так они добывают дрова.
This is how
берите,
children,
берите, берите.
This is how children are fed. This is how they get their firewood.
Это так они выглядят во время обстрела.
This is what they look like when they're shelled.
Это так они ждут, когда кончится тревога воздушная.
This is how they wait until the air raid alert is over.
Вот так они выглядят. Берите, берите.
Look, just like this.
И вот зачем я вам это показал.
And the reason I'm showing you all of this is the following.
У меня была возможность, у меня и у нашей газеты продать нашу Нобелевскую медаль. Ее продали за 103 миллиона с лишним долларов, и эти деньги пошли детям-беженцам на помощь.
Our newspaper, we had an opportunity to sell our Nobel Prize medal, and it was sold for slightly more than $103 million, and this money was given to child refugees.
Я хочу вашей помощи.
So I'm asking you for help.
У нас в мире 3 тысячи миллиардеров.
So in this world we have about 3,000 billionaires.
Я хочу, чтобы мы подписали письмо к 3 тысячам миллиардеров на планете, чтобы мы до Нового года собрали 100 миллионов долларов, вручили их ЮНИСЕФ, то есть ООН, и таким образом спасли от голода 500 тысяч человек.
We want to write a letter to the 3,000 billionaires so that we can collect $100 million before the new year. We'll give this money to UNICEF, to the Iann, and this will save 500,000 children from famine.
Это письмо, вы увидите его на QR-коде.
In this letter, you'll be shown a QR code where you can see this letter.
Yeah. По нашей просьбе, по просьбе Нобелевского комитета, Нобелевского музея и моей, подписали уже 46 выдающихся ученых, лауреатов Нобелевских премий.
And this letter has already been signed after request from the Nobel Committee, from the Nobel Museum, and from myself personally. It has been signed by 46 fantastic scientists, 46 Nobel laureates.
Когда государства не могут о чем-то договориться, должны такие люди, как Нобелевские лауреаты, крупнейшие мировые ученые, помогать.
So when the states cannot agree, when the states cannot help, such people, most prominent people as the Nobel laureate, they have to help.
Знаете, я думаю, что выдающиеся учителя, которые собрались здесь, это своеобразный парламент учителей.
So, and I would say that the prominent teachers, which I see in front of them, this is like a teachers' parliament.
Который должен и может влиять на мир.
Which can influence the world and should do that.
У вас же в руках будущее.
Because you hold the future in your hands.
Смотрите, у этих детей отобрали прошлое, лишили их домов, школ, родителей.
And these children, they've lost their past. They were deprived of their families, of their schools, of their houses.
Давайте им попробуем вернуть будущее.
Let's try to attempt to give them back their future.
Мы не смогли спасти их прошлое, но, может быть, нам получится помочь вернуть им будущее.
We couldn't save their past. Maybe we can help them to get their future back.
Давайте соберем для ЮНИСЕФ эти деньги на помощь детям-беженцам и голодающим детям.
So let's raise this money for UNICEF to help children refugees and children who suffer from hunger.
Дорогие учителя, я вам предлагаю исправить историю прямо сейчас на глазах друг у друга.
And dear teachers, I propose to you to change history right now in the presence of each other.
Подписывайте письмо, не пожалеете.
Sign this letter, you won't regret it.
Спасибо.
Thank you.
So, well, with those words, we want to thank you so much, and we wish you and your colleagues the very best. Thank you. A warm hand to Mr. Muratov.
I want you to give a warm hand to our next guest on stage. It's Mats Persson, the Swedish Minister for Education. Hey Mats.
Hey, nice to be here.
Nice to have you here. So I will give Mats only 2 questions, but bear with us a little. It's maybe 2 questions that you could write like a couple of papers or a couple of books on. So, and you have a short amount of time. But anyhow, the first one is, we stand before challenges that were never encountered earlier, like climate change and the downside of new information technology that we have heard a little bit about today. But how should schools adapt and tackle these challenges? What do you think?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And I wish I had the one simple answer to that question. I don't. But I think there are several things that we can do. And I think if you take the issue of climate change, I think there is one huge difference nowadays compared to 5 or 10 years back in time. And that is that it used to be a question of individual decisions. How should I travel? How should I eat? But nowadays it's more a question where it should be. It's a structural. It's more about structural issues, and it ends up high on the political agenda. So it's not anymore an individual decision. It's a part of a political decision making that needs to take place. And what's happening right now is that more and more people and more politicians, as myself, realize that the key factor to deal with climate change is technology. And the companies, the multinational companies, the small companies, they have understood it, and we see now rapidly investments in new technology in order to decrease the CO2 emissions around the world. And so if you're a young person, you want to make a difference, you want to deal with the climate change, the best thing you can do is actually to learn how to or develop new technology in order to solve the issue of the climate crisis, and that's a enormous journey, enormous change compared to how this discussion was before. And from the Swedish perspective, what we're working on, given that, is that we're working very much more now on the STEM subjects, science, technology, engineering, and maths. Because all around the world, you will see that if you want to be in the frontier of the technology, you have to invest a lot in those subjects. However, not only investing in maths, you also have to invest and learn our kids how to read, because if you can't read, you can't learn maths. So everything is to some extent connected. So if I had to just pick one thing, it would be to invest in the STEM subjects and have a strategy in order to increase young people and the whole society's ability to develop new technology in order to solve the climate crisis, climate change crisis that we have at the moment.
Thank you very much. And I think that it's a little bit connected to the next question, because if you invest in STEM subjects and engage students in that, they have to feel engaged as well and have the ability to invest in those subjects. And in the dream scenario, we have a school where all the students are engaged, but it's the fact that stress and mental illness among the young is increasing. And what can politicians on the national level do to make our students' situation better? I guess this applies to not only to Sweden, but...
Yeah, unfortunately, it's a global phenomenon. And I mean, during the pandemics, a lot of kids around the world, or young people around the world, they couldn't go to school. And in many countries, Sweden as well, but even more, I would say, in other countries, we find more and more young people who don't want to go to school, who stay at home, home sitters, and that's a huge problem, and huge problem not only in Sweden but in other countries as well. The question has, of course, many dimensions. I think one of them is the use of the new technology. Honestly, do we really think that small kids can use the new technology in the way we can as adults? I don't think so. So we need to have changed the school system in order to have more focus on books and less focus on digital devices in particular for small kids. And higher up in the ages, I think it's very much to have a knowledge about how individuals use the new technology in order to have social interactions with each other, and that obviously has had some negative effects. So that's one dimension. I would say another dimension is, of course, the importance of having clear structures and clear high demands on students, but obvious and clear demands on students. Everything that makes not at least young women stressful because the demands are too high. I think we need to deal with that issue as well.
Thank you very much. I would love to integrate and dive into this, but we have you here for a short time, and we're very honored that you came here and answered these questions. Please, Mats.
Yeah. No, but I think it's obvious for every politician around the world that there is a trade-off between having very expansive climate policy, if I put it that way, high taxes on, for example, carbon taxes, for example, on the one hand. On the other hand, you need to have a situation where all the people in all countries find those solutions, or find this policy reasonable from their perspective. And we have now a situation with the war in Europe, with the invasion in Ukraine from Russia, which has implied that the prices on the oil prices have, because Russia has been a heavily involved actor in order to increase the prices on oil, which implies that all around Europe the households are suffering from the high cost. In UK, the standard term is the crisis of high living costs, for example. So this is a European phenomenon. And if you want to have a climate policy that is effective, but also has has the people with you, and it's which is legitimate from the citizen of the population, then you need to find the right balance. And we don't want to end up in the situation such as in France, where you have a lot of demonstrations with angry people, where the climate policy, so to speak, hits the door when there is no when people doesn't accept the policy. So you can have different opinions regarding if this is the right policy or not. I have totally respect for that. You can have a different opinion, but the motivation is to find the right balance between the people's legitimacy for the policy and to also deal with climate change. We know that we can raise we know that we can deal with the climate crisis if we just increase the taxes on carbon. We know that we can do that. But the problem is that it will end up like it have been doing in Paris, with riots and with a lot of demonstrations, and where Macron has to take a step back. And honestly, I think that research. I have a research background myself. We lack knowledge on what type of climate policy that is possible to implement in order to also have a public support for the policy. We know from the IPCC panel how the situation about the situation. We, to some extent, know what kind of tools we can use. For example, a global carbon tax or different types of arrangement. But we don't know what kind of political solutions that also have a public support, and that is a trade-off. And I don't think actually that anyone knows exactly how that trade-off should look like. But that's the honest answer, so to speak. And you have to deal with those things at the same time. The Swedish government, we have a long tradition, and I'm very proud of the Swedish climate policy. We are the only country in the world. We were first in the world with the taxes on carbon taxes, or one of the first in the world with that. And we have decreased our emissions by 1/3 since the 1990s, and at the same time we have had an economic boom in the society. So we can show to other countries that look at Sweden, it's possible to deal with climate change and also have a good economic development at the same time. We have shown that before, and we will show it again. So I'm very proud. We have to do more, but we have done a lot. We will do more, but we also have to find a balance between the climate policy and the public support.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Persson.
So whenever we have the privilege to invite Nobel Prize laureates as guests, we meet world-famous people. They are superstars within their own fields. They become role models for others, and they travel around the world to meet stakeholders of all sorts. What we sometimes perhaps need to be reminded of is that this is not the whole picture. Behind a successful experiment lies 100 of failed ones, and the work of a peace activist, with or without a Nobel Prize, is often the very opposite to fine dining, and we are going to talk about that. Please, a warm welcome to Nobel Peace Prize laureate of 2011, Tawakkol, Karman.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you, Karen.
So I must say, you have the most amazing nicknames I can ever imagine.
Really?
Yes. You are called the Mother of Revolution, the Iron Woman, to give 2 examples. Now, we have a room filled with teachers, and I'm thinking, if you are called the Mother of Revolution, I imagine you were not a very quiet and timid student at school.
Of course. Of course, I have a lot of complaints from my teachers. And now when they meet me, oh my God, you are Tawakkol, the same Tawakkol that we were really, annoyed because of you. I was really very outspoken and very active, and also at the same time I'm very respected. I don't know why. Teachers really loved me a lot. But at the same time, I was really, very strong. student, very strong and very, I don't know, you say noisy? Yes, I was so noisy, so noisy. And I supposed to be, by the way, teacher. And this is a new information maybe for some people will know about me. I graduate from a school that it's a teaching school. So, and one of the most important story in my memory that made me change my future, my dream to be a teacher, to be a journalist or to be a human rights activist or to be something else than teacher, is something happened between me and between a teacher, and I was everything, anything that happened, I was the voice of the student. I was the leader of the student. And one day there was a rain in the school, and the teacher, she shouted in the yard, and she said to the students, "Shut up, listen!" And her voice was very, very high. And I stand in front of her, and I told her, "Teacher, please, why do you scream like this?" And she said, I told her, "Please, teacher, if you tell them with a not that high, with that high voice, maybe they will listen to you and they will change their behavior. But now when you shout in them, they will change their behavior because they are afraid from you, not because they think they know that they believe that they are doing something wrong." And she said, "Tawakkol, look, this rain, and God is listening to us. And God, Tawakkol is going to be teacher next year. Please, give her students like her." I said, "No, I don't want." So I was really, I appreciate all your work, especially with the students like me. So big salute to every teacher around the world. Very big, really. Yeah, I made a lot of noise, a lot of activity, a lot of mistakes. But I had a very great teachers that respected me, that listened to me. And yes, there is some bad, positions, but the most it was, with the teachers that really gave me the floor to be the leader that I am now. So thank you to my teachers.
Well, that is something that so many Nobel Prize laureates come back to, the importance of a teacher that have seen them early on and appreciated them and encouraged them. It's like a red thread through history. Yeah.
For me, in my memory, there was two teachers. One of them is a manager, the manager of the school. At when I was in the 6th grade, I made a mistake, and I really didn't forget that mistake. And she stand in behalf of the school, all the school, and she said, "The person who made this mistake should come to my office and say that I am the one who did that." She didn't blame me in front of the people. She didn't, and I went to her, I apologized, and that moment really made a lot of things in my personality. And there is another teachers who tried to destroy me, and a lot. But also with this teacher, that also reshaped my personality of being strong and don't give up. And so with two kinds of teacher, the one who supported me and one who tried to destroy me, that also reshaped my personality. But for my advice to every teacher in the world, they have to believe in their students, and they have to teach them how to be leader, and they have to be patient on their activities, on their noisy things, and they have to listen to them. Teach them how to be the voice of people. Teach them how to be brave. Teach them how to be strong enough, how to be that nothing will break them one day. This is your rule as a teacher, more than teach them how to read or how to anything else. It's shaping the personality of your students is very, very important for this world, for their future, for your future, for the for the future of the of all generations. Yeah.
And speaking of courage, years before the Arabic Spring, you went out to the same squares in Sana'a, peacefully demonstrating for human rights and democracy. In a country where that was not very obvious, you pointed at a president who'd been there for ages, telling him to go away. Where did that courage come from? Encouraging teachers?
No, not encouraging teachers, no. Because I made a lot of demonstrations and sit-ins, and that really make my teachers, upset, a lot. So I remember one of the demonstrations that I made in the school because the administration decided to change the math teacher. Then I led the students to make demonstration in front of the manager office. Then she came and she shouted, "What's happened?" And everyone, escaped. I was the only one at that, then. And that gave me more, a lot of strength that I shouldn't give up, and at the same time that I should also educate people with me in the case that we have to work together. Yeah. And that was also very important moment that taught me how to be against the dictator. And I organized hundreds of demonstrations against the dictator Ali Abdullah Saleh in Sana'a, in the Freedom Square in Sana'a, the capital of Yemen, Sana'a, and also in Change Square in front of Sana'a University. And I started this journey alone as a woman and also as a human rights defenders. And I was always thinking about what the experience that I learned when I was a student, when I led that kind of demonstrations. So first I brought the people, the victims people, that really call for they want their rights. So I encourage them to demand for their rights, and at the same time to call for the rights of the people, and started with the expression rights. So that was, my first journey is with the victims people, especially people who came from villages, came to my organization, Women Journalists Without Chains, and also with journalists and press outlets, newspapers, websites, etc., that was, blocked by the government, or journalists that been arrested by the government, etc., etc. My organization and my sit-ins and demonstrations was their voice. So as I was the voice of students in the school, I became the voice of journalists, after that, and the voice of people, who call for their certain issues, that they call for justice for anything, happened in Yemen, and then the voice of people who call for freedom, justice, democracy, and rule of law, and then all that peaceful, continuous sit-in and demonstration every Tuesday since 2016 until 2006 until 2011. We organized every Tuesday in front of the Freedom Square, in front of the cabinet. Every Tuesday sit-in for expression rights in general and certain no rights. And one of the rights was the teachers' rights. And one of the syndicates that work with us, they were so active was, and when they came to the square came with tens of thousands of teachers. They call for their rights, and every Tuesday since 2006 until 2011 led to the great revolution against the dictator, that we announced that we gave up on, waiting any solution from this dictator. So now there is a new era of calling for human rights, which is this dictator has to leave the power if we want really a stable, peace, and democratic Yemen. So that was the call for the peaceful revolution in Yemen in 2011.
Yeah, and it started in December 2010 in Tunisia, where a young man,
Bouazizi.
Yes,
Bouazizi,
who tried to make a living and finally committed suicide.
Look,
and this spread Northern Africa and finally to Syria, Yemen. You were already an activist, as you said, been that for years. Can you recall when this wind came and when you joined in the Arabic Spring or the Jasmine Revolution, as you call it?
Look, when you talk about the Yemen Revolution, Arab Spring Revolution came as the second step of the revolution, because as I told you, there was every Tuesday peaceful demonstration, gathered many people, for human rights in general, for against corruption, against wars, so that escalate this, the refuse of people, of the policy of the government increase every day. And also in the south, also another, peaceful, movement raised, and I participated in it. So, but with all that movement, all our calls was to the dictator or to the system to make change. Please stop war. Please stop deterioration in economy. Please change this law. Change this. All of stop human rights violations. Stop arresting people. Stop killing. All of it. Stop. Do that. But when while that, I wrote a lot of articles that we need this regime to step down. This is the only solution. But people were not convinced. Parties, NGOs, people know that's so big to call for revolution. So it's the only thing. It's reform within the system. So we made it that for years. We called for that reform for this. But what happened when the Tunisian revolution came? It convinced the people that the only solution for creating change in this environment of dictatorship is changing the dictator himself. The dictator should leave if we want to achieve any reforms or if we want to achieve any great change for the future. So yes, Tunisia gave us a good lesson, and that was a very big opportunity for me. Okay, at that time, we declare, I gathered, and this is very important. The students in Yemen play a very, very, very big role in the revolution. Before the revolution, the people who were around me was the victims and some of the human rights defenders and teachers and some. But when we decided to make the revolution, it was with students. So we at that time in 14 January 2011, I gathered some of the Sana'a University leaders, students leaders, in my house, and we started to write the revolution declaration. And then we went to Sana'a University, and in front of Sana'a University we changed the square from Freedom Square in front of the cabinet to be the Change Square in front of the Sana'a University. And with the students and with teachers also, the professor in the Sana'a University, some of them, they also play a great role in this very historical turning point of Yemen. And the same thing happened, by the way, in Tunis, in Egypt, in Syria, in Sudan, and all students and all people, led this, point or turning point for breaking the walls of fear in front of the people. That was the very important, point, that we did. Yeah.
It is not very polite to ask a guest of a present, but we at the Nobel Prize Museum, we tend to do so. So when you visited the Nobel Prize Museum years ago, we asked you to bring an artifact. And my colleague Helena here will show you what normally is seen behind, well, within a showcase at the museum. It has been seen by hundreds of thousands of visitors, many students. And it is, yes. And I remember it was winter and you came, it was snowy, and you came with a plastic bag and you handed it over and you said, "Here, I give you my voice."
Yes, it is. It's
So
my
what is
voice, it's my army, and it's my weapon. This megaphone. Yeah. I'm so proud of it. And I depend on it, oh my God, in front of all soldiers around me. They tried a lot to take it from me. They failed. And when they took it, they took me to the prison. So I'm so proud of this megaphone, because this megaphone was really, really the will of people, the voice of people, the destiny of people in Yemen. That was, without this megaphone, we wouldn't be able to reach to the Yemeni people. I carried this megaphone alone in Sana'a streets, calling Yemeni people to wake up. Tell them, wake up, you should wake up now to save Yemen. And I carry this megaphone alone in front of Sana'a University, and I called teachers and students in Sana'a University for change through this megaphone. And I never think that my voice will not reach to the people. And they made a lot of, bad pictures of me with this, caricatures with these megaphones. And the dictator, system did a lot of things bad against me and against my tools, especially my camera and my megaphone. But I'm so proud. And I'm so proud. And anyone who came to here and take photo with that means he made it, he portray the most important turning point of Arab Spring history and current. This megaphone wasn't just the voice of Tawakkol, it was the voice of all Arab people who dream for democracy, for freedom, for justice, for equality, for rule of law. And that was the only tool from us. And that was the only tool from us as a Yemeni people, by the way. I belong to a society that owned more than 60 million pieces of weapons. And those people choose to carry the same voice and to carry the flowers from one hand, megaphone, and from one hand is flowers in front of all the violence of the dictator. And with this, we forced Ali Abdullah Saleh, the dictator of Yemen, to step down. Hosni Mubarak to step down, the dictator of Egypt, the dictator of Sudan, the dictator of Algeria, the dictator of Libya. All of them, all the revolution started with the voice of people. So I'm so proud, and thank you for bringing, and I'm gonna cry because that gave a lot of memories.
Well, so
and I was good student and not that much noisy. So why didn't I use the megaphone inside the school?
Oh, maybe the teachers did appreciate that.
They were so good, and really, I was blessed with them. But also I was blessed also with the toughest teachers, and now they told, oh, we apologize that we didn't deal with you, in a good way as a leader, but you gave us a very good lesson how to deal with the other students. And that is, I had a lot of, messages from these teachers, but I am really, really so proud of all my teachers, especially with the first manager, teacher Tagrid, who protected me when I was, at 6th grade. Oh my God, I never, forget that.
You never forget those teachers, do you?
Yeah, I never forget that.
Well, you are proud of that one, and we are so grateful for this, as you can imagine. It is a reminder to us all that we have a voice and that we actually can use it. Thank you so much, Tawakkol, Karman. A warm
Thank you
hand.
so much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
I wish you all the luck. Thank you. Should I leave?
So, yes, I'll just say something.
They said it's property of the museum. I think I should take it and sing some revolution songs, but they are afraid to be broken. Thank you. As-salama. Thank you. Thank you. Bye. Thank you. I really thank you.
So we are coming. Oh, sorry. So we're coming to an end, and we from the Nobel Prize Museum, we are so grateful, moved, and excited what this day have brought to us. You have each and one contributed to a fantastic energy in this room. Thank you so much for that. We have met several journalists here today, and perhaps there are some similarities between journalists and teachers. Nobel Prize laureate Maria Ressa, she says that there has never been a better time being a journalist. Because when it is the most dangerous, it is most necessary. And that goes for education as well. When it seems dark and difficult, when books are banned and science is questioned, we need you teachers the most.